Hey guys, tonight we drift quietly down the dim-lit corridors of history's grandest palaces, marble halls echoing with slippered footsteps, tapestries sagging with secrets, the air thick with beeswax, perfume and the quiet dread of being born royal. You're not a guest, you're trapped in this golden cage, shuffling through endless doorways as candle flames flicker and portraits stare down with oddly familiar heavy-lidded eyes. As you glide by a row of armoured mannequins, none of them blink. You check twice. You catch your own reflection in a tarnished shield. For a moment you look just like the portraits, pale, delicate, haunted. Maybe a little too much chin. Don't worry, that's just tonight's spell working. You probably won't survive this night as a royal heir, but at least you won't be bored. So, before we go any further, if this quiet space makes you feel even a little less alone, you can like the video and subscribe. But only if it feels right to your heart. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you lying awake in a quiet room at 2 AM, or maybe starting your day in a rainy city? Eyes still heavy? Drop your time and place in the comments. Let's remind each other we're not alone out here. Now, dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin tonight's slow, strange journey together, here on Timeless Sleep. It begins, as so many things do, with family. But this isn't the kind of family that gathers around a backyard barbecue, everyone grinning in sun-bleached snapshots. No, royal families are puzzles designed to keep you guessing. Who's your cousin? Who's your sister? Why does your family tree seem to have more loops than branches? In these palaces, you feel it. The weight of inheritance pressing down on every velvet cushion, every whisper in the servants' halls. A single wrong marriage might spell disaster for an empire, but the right marriage? Well, that often means finding a suitable spouse just down the hallway, awkwardly down the corridor where your mother also happens to be your father's niece. You walk past doors painted with lilies and lions, each one hiding a history of strategic unions, ambitious alliances, and the relentless pursuit of purity. It's a world where bloodlines matter more than almost anything. More, even, than happiness, or health, or sometimes basic common sense. You pass a chamber thick with incense. On the bed lies a doll with the face of an emperor. Its cheeks are painted high, but its eyes are strangely close together, a detail copied faithfully from real royal portraits. Your mind drifts. How many royal children grew up with dolls that looked exactly like their fathers, or their mothers, or distressingly both at once? Through another set of heavy doors, you enter a banquet hall. The table stretches to infinity, groaning under the weight of roasted peacocks, sugared fruit, and goblets etched with coats of arms. You find your place between a pouting archduke and a princess who looks suspiciously like she might be your sister twice removed, and also your cousin thrice over. The conversation is stilted, nervous, and sometimes veers into Latin when things get awkward. Under the candlelight, you realize everyone is watching each other, measuring the sharpness of chins, the angle of noses, the shade of hair. The old women mutter about the look, that look, the one all true heirs must possess, as if royal blood wears a uniform, as if nobility could be seen, not just inherited. Above you, the ceiling glitters with constellations painted in gold leaf. It's beautiful, but you notice that none of the stars quite match the sky outside. That's the thing about royal families. They'd rather paint their own reality than admit something's amiss. In this room, the universe bends to the whims of blood and dynasty, and if your orbit strays too far, you might find yourself quietly shuffled off to a distant convent or an isolated hunting lodge, out of sight, out of mind. But for now, you're here, surrounded by laughter that sounds a little forced, wine poured with a trembling hand, and eyes that never quite meet yours for too long. Maybe they're worried you'll see yourself in them, or vice versa. Maybe you already do. A little dog scampers under the table, wearing a velvet cape and a collar of pearls. It barks at nothing, then scurries away. That was King Louis's favourite, someone whispers. You wonder if they mean the dog, or the chair it just disappeared beneath. You stand, and the room blurs into the corridor again. Palaces are like that, more dream than blueprint. You trail your fingers along the wall, where the portraits hang in chronological order. Father, son, grandson, great-grandson, over and over. The faces begin to merge, the chins sharpen, the lips thin out, eyes growing more melancholy. There's a painting of a prince, Jaw so pronounced it juts into the room like a prow. Another of a princess, her shoulders sloped, eyes set close as beads on a string. These aren't caricatures, these are warnings painted in oil and regret. You remember what your tutor once whispered, after a goblet too many, "We're all just reflections, boy. The family tree's a mirror with no escape." You were 8. You thought he meant you looked like your father. You understand more now. Outside, the night thickens. You slip onto a balcony, breathing in cool air that smells of stone and distant roses. Below, the gardens are perfectly symmetrical. Every hedge, every path, every pond arranged to please the eye and soothe the mind. Nothing here is left to chance. Everything, even the trees, must bend to a master plan. That's the dream of royal blood, isn't it? A garden with no wild branches, no surprises, just perfect, endless symmetry. But even the best-kept gardens hide rot below the surface. Worms turn the earth, roots twist and crowd together, and sometimes if you listen hard, you can hear something struggling to breathe beneath it all. A voice calls you back inside. You return to the private chambers, where the real business of dynasty is done. Not in council rooms or on battlefields, but here in the hush of night, behind doors thick enough to muffle a scream or a sob. This is where kings are made, and sometimes unmade. A nurse sits by the fire, cradling a baby wrapped in royal blue. The child is feverish, its cry thin and reedy. You hear the mother whisper, "He'll be strong, he must be strong." The physician frowns, examines the infant's tiny jaw, his hands, the set of his eyes. He says nothing, but the silence is heavier than stone. There's a rattle in the air, the sound of 1,000 anxious prayers, each one a plea for health, for strength, for a future not already written in blood. Outside these walls, the people gossip. They tell stories about the king's heir, how he never speaks, how he limps, how he cannot bear sunlight or loud sounds. The rumours grow, twisting through the city like ivy up a crumbling wall. Some say the family is cursed. Others say the family is just stubborn, refusing to learn the most basic lesson. You cannot cheat nature forever. You wander down to the kitchens, searching for warmth. The servants barely glance at you. They know to keep their eyes lowered, their voices soft. Still, you overhear them stories of old queens who bled for weeks, princes who never woke, daughters hidden away behind locked doors because their faces weren't right. One servant snickers. You'd think with all that gold they could buy a new face. He's silenced with a sharp look. Joking about royal misfortune is a dangerous sport. Still, in this world, gallows humour is sometimes all you have. Someone hands you a cup of spiced milk. You sip, letting the warmth seep into your bones. For a moment you remember a different world, one where cousins were just awkward at reunions, not potential threats to entire empires. Here, love is measured out in teaspoons, and marriage proposals are contracts written in blood. As you climb the servant stairs, you catch a glimpse of a young man staring into a mirror. He's dressed for a portrait, but he looks terrified. "Hold your chin up," his mother hisses from the doorway. He tries, but his jaw juts too far. His eyes sink too deep. He'll be remembered not for his bravery or wit, but for the shape of his face. A face that's been carved and recarved by generations of the same few surnames. You linger in the gallery, surrounded by silence. History breathes down your neck. Every stone, every tapestry, every dusty book is a record of choices made in the name of power. Marry your cousin, preserve the line, hope for the best. Repeat. Pray the next child will be strong, healthy, normal. Sometimes you wonder if anyone ever prayed for happiness. Outside, the wind howls, shaking the window panes. You pull your cloak tighter, remembering that not all monsters wear crowns. Some are born of fear, or greed, or a desperate need to belong. But some, well, Some are simply the result of a family that loved itself a little too much, for a little too long. As the night deepens, you hear footsteps behind you. Is it the ghost of an old king? The echo of your own uncertain future? Or maybe it's just the house settling, as all old houses do. You're not sure, but you know you're not alone. Not in this palace. Not in this story. Not tonight. You settle onto a velvet chaise, the room lit only by a single candle. Shadows dance on the ceiling, twisting into shapes that might be dragons, or just the outlines of that infamous family tree. Roots tangled, branches looping back on themselves, each leaf marked with a name and a date, and sometimes a whispered warning. You close your eyes, listening to the lullaby of royal secrets. The song is old, older than the stones beneath your feet, and it ends the same way every time, with a hope, a fear, a promise made in the dark. As sleep creeps in, you wonder, will the next generation break the cycle? Or are you doomed to wander these halls forever? Another portrait on a wall, another story half told. Maybe that's the true curse of royalty, to be remembered always, but never truly known. You're still drifting, slowly, softly, through those maze-like corridors. The hour grows later, and the shadows seem to deepen, swallowing every corner where the tapestries are frayed. Outside, the moon glances off the marble, spotlighting statues with faces that look uncannily like the living. Here, you stand before the family tree, but it's not the kind you'd find tacked above a suburban mantelpiece. This one is a mural stretching up and up, roots gnarled and twisting back toward their own trunks. It's here, in the dim silence, that you realize something. This isn't just history, this is strategy. These people aren't playing house, they're playing chess, and the stakes are nothing less than kingdoms. The logic, if you can call it that, is both simple and terrifying. In a world where power is measured in blood, you can't risk letting that blood spill outside the boundaries you've drawn. Foreigners are risky, strangers unpredictable, even distant cousins. Well, the further you get, the less certain you are that their veins run with the right sort of blue. So what do? You keep it close. You marry your kin, again and again. You notice how for each generation the names seem to recycle. Philip, Isabella, Charles, Maria, over and over. It's as if there's an unwritten rule that not only must the genes stay pure, but the very names must echo down the hallways, haunting every new child with the shadow of those who came before. There's an unsettling intimacy to it all. In these gilded cages, the phrase "keep it in the family" isn't just a joke, it's a law. You picture a wedding banquet, a hall hung with gold, candles flickering, the air heavy with the scent of lilies. The bride is 15, the groom is 21. He is her uncle, or perhaps her first cousin, or best not to look too closely. Their parents sit at the high table, smiling tightly, their faces unreadable. Somewhere a courtier raises a toast to the prosperity of the realm, and nobody mentions the elephant in the room. This marriage is both a promise and a threat. The awkwardness is almost tangible. You imagine the bride's trembling hand clutching the arm of someone who played hide and seek with her when she was a child. You imagine the gossip that bubbles just beneath the surface, whispers about who will inherit what, about which line is truly legitimate, about the birthmarks on the lisp and the fact that both bride and groom have the exact same dimple on their left cheek. In the background, a court painter mixes more rose into her cheeks, more gold into his hair, hoping nobody notices that their noses are exactly the same shape. You slip away from the banquet, up another staircase, the air growing colder as you ascend toward the private rooms. Here, the silence grows heavier. This is the domain of the matriarchs, the women who truly know where the bones are buried. Their chambers smell of lavender and secrecy. You hear them discussing marriages yet to be arranged, debating which cousin from which branch is the least troublesome, which niece has the healthiest colouring, which nephew's tutors swear he's clever enough to outsmart the odds. They speak in code, layering their words with careful diplomacy, for in this world, a single misstep can reverberate down centuries. It isn't always about love, of course. It's about survival. To be royal is to walk a tightrope with no net. The throne is forever under siege, from ambitious neighbours, jealous siblings, scheming courtiers, and the ever-present threat of disease. Any sign of weakness, a limp, a stutter, a tendency to swoon in the sun, might be a crack in the armour, and so the logic persists. The only way to keep the dynasty alive is to marry those you already know, to trust the family, to never let an outsider get close enough to take it all away. Sometimes the plans work. The kingdom survives. The line endures. The blood remains blue at least for a little while. Other times the price is too high. The looping of the family tree tightens into a noose. You hear the stories murmured by servants in the hall. The prince who never learned to speak. The princess who died at 12. The king whose fits of madness grew so violent that his own mother locked him away. Still, the cycle repeats. You move through time, decade by decade, wedding by wedding, feeling the branches twist tighter and tighter. You see a little girl, hair braided in ribbons, practicing her curtsy before a portrait of her great-uncle, who was also her grandfather. You see a young man, staring into a pool, tracing the shape of his nose, wondering why it looks so much like the one on the coins in his pocket. You see mothers wringing their hands, fathers negotiating treaties, physicians offering hope, laced with resignation. The justifications are everywhere. It's tradition, someone sighs, as if that explains the haunted eyes of the boy king. It's God's will, another insists, as if heaven itself drew up the guest list for these family affairs. The priests bless the unions, the lawyers draw up the contracts, and the world turns. But you can feel it. The tension that runs through every corridor, every salon, every nursery, the knowledge that the tree can only bend so far before it snaps. The anxious glances between siblings who are also spouses, the prayers whispered in the dark, not just for heirs but for healthy heirs. Let this one be different. The mothers plead. Let this one survive. You step into a chamber lined with books, tomes in Latin and Greek, genealogies stretching back to Charlemagne, ledgers of births and deaths, alliances and betrayals. You run your finger along a dusty spine and find a diary. Its pages thin and brittle. The handwriting is looping, elegant, desperate. Today my son was born, the entry reads. His eyes are blue, his grip is weak. The physicians say he will live. I pray they are right. I pray he will not suffer as his cousin did. The ink trails off in a blot, as if the writer could not bear to finish the thought. You sit for a moment, letting the silence settle around you. Outside, a clock tolls the hour, 3, perhaps 4. You've lost track. Time is slippery here, folding in on itself just like the family tree. Generations seem to pass in the blink of an eye. The same faces repeating, the same hopes and fears echoing down the halls. You think of all the things these families have traded away for the sake of blood, happiness, freedom, health, even love. You think of the girls sent to convents, the boys sent to war, the siblings married off before they even knew their own minds. You think of the secrets kept behind closed doors, the tragedies whispered about but never named. And yet, somehow, there's resilience here, too. Laughter still rings in the halls. Children still play in the gardens, chasing one another through mazes that mimic the twisted branches of their own family tree. There are moments of joy, however fleeting. Birthdays, coronations, rare wedding that is more than just a transaction. You wander out onto a terrace, the night air cool against your face. The stars above seem brighter here, as if the sky is trying to offer some comfort. You lean on the stone balustrade, looking down at the city below. Fires burn in hearths, ordinary people dreaming ordinary dreamies, untouched by the burdens of lineage. For a moment you envy them, the freedom to marry for love, to name their children after favourite saints instead of long-dead kings, to live without the weight of history pressing on their every choice. You close your eyes and listen to the wind, carrying with it the sounds of distant music, perhaps a lute, perhaps just your imagination. You think of all the lives entwined in this story, all the people whose only crime was being born into a world where love and duty were forever at odds. As dawn threatens, you slip back inside, the palace already beginning to stir. Maids whisper in the corridors, courtiers murmur about the day's meetings. Cooks bang pots in the kitchen, the machinery of the dynasty grinds on, relentless, indifferent to the tragedies hidden beneath its shining surface. You pause before one last portrait, this one of a queen with sad eyes and a mouth set in a line of resolve. You imagine what she might say if she could step down from her frame. "It's never just about us," she might whisper. "It's about what we leave behind." And with that, you move on through the looping corridors, through the tangled branches of the family tree, through a world where love is always second to legacy, and where every choice is haunted by the faces that came before. You wander deeper into the palace, feeling the hush that hangs heavier with every step. The walls are crowded with portraits, each canvas a study in sameness. A long nose here, a pronounced chin there, a haunted gaze that seems to follow you no matter how softly you move. These faces are not merely the echoes of the past, they are blueprints, clues to the puzzle of royal destiny, as carefully catalogued as the family jewels locked away in velvet-lined chests. Tonight you pause beneath one of the most infamous portraits of them all, the Habsburg jaw, rendered in thick oils, with a jawline so severe it might have been carved by a stonemason on a particularly dramatic day. This isn't just art, it's documentation. The Habsburg family, lords of vast swathes of Europe, were as famous for their power as for their pronounced mandibles. It's said you could spot a Habsburg by their profile alone, jutting lower lip, massive chin, mouth that never quite closes, like a perpetual pout of royal disapproval. But how did this happen? It isn't magic, and it's not a coincidence. You find yourself drifting back in time, slipping through the secret doors of history, back to those relentless family-first marriages, uncle to niece, cousin to cousin, alliances so tight that the family tree looks more like a circle. Over generations, this careful inbreeding pressed the same genetic buttons again and again, stacking the odds, like playing a game of cards where everyone holds the same losing hand. You find yourself in a candlelit room, a fire popping in the grate. A prince sits for his portrait, turning this way and that, as the artist tries gently, diplomatically, to capture his likeness. "Chin up," the artist says, then quickly amends. "Not too much," the prince sighs. He's heard it all before. In the court, behind gloved hands, they call it the Habsburg curse. No one says it aloud, not where the king can hear, but everyone knows. The jaw is as much a badge of office as the crown. It's not just about looks though. You remember the tales whispered by the kitchen staff, their voices low so the walls don't overhear. The jaw isn't just inconvenient, it brings real suffering. Many heirs struggle to eat or speak clearly. Some choke on their food, others lisp or mumble, embarrassed by the way their words tumble out over teeth that don't quite fit together. You imagine being a child at the royal table, trying to laugh at jokes you don't understand, hiding your mouth behind your napkin, watching your parents' eyes flick nervously to the court doctor. The Habsburgs weren't the only ones. Across Europe, royal features became a kind of shorthand. Everyone knew which family bred which flaw. The Spanish branch was known for its drooping eyes and peculiar walk. In France, the Bourbon nose was so legendary it became a kind of punchline. A strong profile was a sign of legitimacy, never mind if it came with headaches or breathing trouble. Sometimes, the court painters tried to soften the reality. A little less shadow here, a touch more rose there, but it was impossible to ignore. You wander the halls, your eyes adjusting to the soft candlelight, noting how the same jaw, nose or brow ridge appears again and again, like a family recipe handed down whether you like it or not. You wonder about the private moments, the ones not captured on canvas. A queen brushing her hair, staring into the glass, and tracing the familiar lines in her reflection. A prince who avoids mirrors altogether, focusing on books instead, his head down as he passes through the corridors. A princess whispering to her handmaid, "Do you think I'm beautiful?" and not waiting for the answer. There's a kind of melancholy here, a longing to be something more than a collection of traits. You pass a nursery, where a governess calls to a swaddled baby. She checks the tiny face for telltale signs. The set of the jaw, the shape of the palate, the angle of the ears. The baby gurgles, blissfully unaware of the expectations piled onto its little head. For now, at least, there is hope. But not everyone escapes. You listen as the court doctor, summoned urgently, peers into the mouth of a squirming toddler. He whispers to the nurse, "It's pronounced already. See the underbite?" The mother's face tightens, but she says nothing. She knows the fate of children who don't measure up at best. They are married off quietly to lesser cousins. At worst, they vanish from the family records as if they never existed. You leave the nursery behind, your heart heavy with the knowledge that beauty here is a currency as valuable as gold, and just as cruel. The Habsburg jaw, the Bourbon nose, the Medici eyes, these are not gifts, but burdens. The families wear them like armor, pretending not to notice the cracks underneath. It's not only physical either. You overhear the tutors talking in the library, voices hushed. He struggles to concentrate, one says. She forgets her lessons by nightfall. The records are full of delicate euphemisms: weak constitution, nervous disposition, delicate health. These are code words, veils thrown over deeper problems that no one is allowed to name outright. After all, how can you admit that the royal blood itself, so prized, so protected, is the very thing that's causing the cracks in the kingdom's foundation? You recall a story you heard from the cook, over the clatter of pots and the sizzle of roasting pheasant. The king used to laugh, she said, but now he just sits in silence, watching the fire. They say he has visions, sees people who aren't there. The courtiers call it melancholy, or divine inspiration, or simply the burden of rule. You and I know it for what it is: a mind buckling under the weight of too much history, too many secrets, too much of the same blood. Down in the cellars you find the records, endless ledgers filled with names, dates, marriages, births. You trace your finger along the pages, noting how the lines loop and overlap. Sometimes you find entire branches crossed out, names erased in thick black ink. These are the children who didn't make it, the ones whose bodies or minds betrayed the dynasty. There are more of them than anyone admit. A little joke drifts through your mind. What's the difference between a family tree and a royal family tree? In one, the branches spread wide. In the other, they start to grow in circles. You smile just a little, before the weight of it all returns. There are moments of joy here too, but they are fleeting. A prince who plays chess in the garden, beating everyone with strategies no one else can follow. A princess who writes poetry in secret, her verses hidden under a loose floorboard. A queen who takes in stray animals, insisting they at least be allowed to choose their own mates. But the shadow always returns. At dinner you watch as the king struggles to chew, the muscles of his jaw working overtime. The courtiers pretend not to notice, but you see the glances they exchange, the silent calculations. How long will he last? Who will take his place? And will the next in line be any stronger, any wiser, any different? Sometimes you hear laughter, genuine, warm, almost defiant. It echoes through the halls, a reminder that life persists, even in the most stifling of cages. But just as often, you hear weeping muffled behind thick doors, the sound of dreams deferred or denied. You wander through the palace gardens, where topiaries stand in perfect rows, each trimmed to resemble some long-dead ancestor. You run your hand along the hedges, marveling at the care that goes into maintaining such order. But even here you spot a branch that grows the wrong way, a flower that blooms out of season. Nature, it seems, always finds a way to break the rules, no matter how tightly the gardeners prune. As night deepens, you climb to the highest tower, seeking perspective. The city sprawls below, alive with the hum of ordinary lives, people who marry for love, who welcome new faces into their families, who bear children without the weight of centuries pressing down on every heartbeat. You envy them, just a little. Up here among the marble and gold, every choice is a negotiation, every joy tempered by duty. You look again at the portraits lining the walls of the tower, and you see something new. It's not just sadness or pride or even ambition. It's hope, a stubborn, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, the next generation will break free, that the jaws will soften, the eyes will brighten, the hearts will open, that the family tree will at last begin to grow outward again. You turn from the window, ready to descend back into the maze. The journey is far from over, and your story is still being written. One face, one name, one hope at a time. You move quietly now, candle in hand, through the twisting corridors of this palace, sensing the ancient air of pride and paranoia. Too pure for the peasants. That's the whisper you hear echoed down the halls, behind velvet drapes, and in the glinting eyes of the men and women who clutch their family crests like talismans. You pause by a gilded doorway, catching snatches of conversation from the council chamber beyond. Advisors murmur about alliances and heirs, always circling back to the question of blood. Whose is pure enough? Whose might taint the line? Whose could strengthen the throne? It would almost be funny if it weren't so deadly serious. In this world, a single marriage, one wedding, one contract sealed with a nervous handshake and a shared goblet of wine can send ripples through generations, toppling dynasties, starting wars, or quietly spelling disaster behind closed curtain. It would almost be funny if it weren't so deadly serious. In this world, a single marriage, one wedding, one contract sealed with a nervous handshake and a shared goblet of wine can send ripples through generations, toppling dynasties, starting wars, or quietly spelling disaster behind closed curtains. You slip in and out of centuries as if moving through a gallery of memories. Medieval Spain, where the Habsburgs eye their gene pool with suspicion, locking out outsiders and drawing the marriage net ever closer. France, where the Bourbons host masquerade balls more to size up eligible kin than to celebrate carnival. England, with its tightly wound Tudor alliances, watching the continent with a mixture of envy and dread, keenly aware that one wrong marriage could mean losing everything. The phrase "too pure for the peasants" is more than just arrogance. It's armor. It's protection against the ever-present fear that power, once lost, can never be regained. In this system, every child is a fortress and every marriage a brick in the wall that separates the rulers from the ruled. You walk beside a princess whose future has already been decided by men she's never met, her life a pawn in a never-ending chess game. Don't fall in love, her governess warns in a rare moment of honesty. Love is for the people below. Up here, you marry for the good of the blood. You hear it too in the language of the court, phrases like "born to rule," "of the right stock," "fit to be queen." These are spells repeated so often that even the ones who suffer most by them believe in their power. The court physician, peering at newborns through spectacles, measuring the width of foreheads and the angle of chins, mumbles that purity breeds strength, yet you see the nurses exchanging anxious glances, quietly tallying up the fevers and fainting fits. The fragile babies who don't make it past infancy. You pass a gallery where the walls are covered with tapestries depicting glorious ancestors, knights in shining armor, queens in flowing gowns, kings whose faces glow with a radiance not found in any mortal. The message is clear. Our family is chosen, set apart, destined for greatness. But you, with your modern eyes, see something else. You notice how the faces look more and more alike with each panel, the variety draining away like colour from an old photograph. You think of the rumors, the prince who cannot walk, the princess who can barely speak above a whisper, the countess kept hidden from sight because her body didn't follow the plan. The obsession with untainted blood goes deeper than mere vanity. It's woven into the laws and customs of the realm. You glimpse the elaborate genealogical charts kept locked in iron chests, the marriage contracts stipulating not just dowries, but the exact number of generations separating bride and groom. The church, the ever-present partner in royal schemes, issues dispensations with a sigh and a shake of the head, muttering about necessity and the good of the realm. Sometimes even the Pope is forced to look the other way. In the grand dining hall, you take a seat at the far end of the table and watch the drama unfold. The king, old now, trembling with gout, yet fiercely proud, insists that his son must wed the daughter of his cousin to keep the line strong. The son nods, face unreadable. The princess, barely 16, sits in silence, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the gilded salt cellar. All around, courtiers chatter and laugh, but you sense the tension. Everyone knows what's at stake, and everyone is pretending they don't. You catch a glimpse of yourself in a silver tray, and for a moment you feel the claustrophobia of this world, the suffocating pressure to fit into a mold that grows smaller with each generation. The purity that the royals cling to is a paradox. Meant to keep them safe, it slowly strangles the very line it was supposed to protect. Stepping away from the feast, you wander into the antechamber, where young nobles cluster in tight groups, whispering behind lace fans and feathered hats. A young count jokes too loudly about his own family tree. All knots and no branches. The laughter is nervous, teetering on the edge of fear. You sense that everyone here knows the truth, but nobody dares to name it. That blue blood is as much a curse as a blessing. The further you go, the more you notice the cracks in the system. You overhear a heated exchange between two dowagers about a recent wedding. He's her third cousin, not second. It's not close enough, but her grandmother doesn't count. We need a real connection. The logic is dizzying, the rules arbitrary, but the stakes are all too real. In a quiet corner, you find a young girl with a book open on her lap, eyes brimming with frustration. She's tracing her own lineage, trying to understand the rules, but the chart looks like a spider's web spun by a spider who'd lost its mind. "Why can't I just marry who I want?" she mutters. You want to answer, to explain that freedom here is a dangerous luxury, one reserved for those without kingdoms to lose. You slip into a chapel, its air cool and scented with candle wax and old prayers. Here, you witness a secret. A priest, coaxed by gold and fear, quietly altering baptismal records, smoothing out a suspicious overlap of names, making a close cousin appear just distant enough for the marriage to proceed. It's not malice, it's survival. The family must endure, no matter the cost. The line must remain pure, even if that means rewriting history itself. Sometimes the logic breaks down entirely. You recall the tale of a young prince who was declared unfit for the throne, not because he was sickly, but because someone discovered a peasant 6 generations back in his mother's line. The horror, the scandal, the entire branch quietly trimmed from the tree, names erased, portraits removed, as if they had never existed. Meanwhile, the children born to first cousins are paraded as miracles, their frailties dismissed as delicate constitutions. You linger in the Queen's private garden, where the roses have been carefully bred for perfection. No wildflowers here, every petal, every thorn chosen for its place in the design. The Queen herself wanders the paths, pruning shears in hand, snipping away any shoot that dares to stray. She greets you with a polite smile, but you see the exhaustion in her eyes. She's been told all her life that her duty is to keep the garden pure, but tonight, as she bends to examine a rose with petals twisted in on themselves, you sense her uncertainty. "Sometimes," she whispers, "I wonder if we've bred the wildness out of them, if we've made them too fragile to survive a real storm." The gust of wind rattles the glass, and you're swept back into the palace, where the pure children are paraded before the court, their faces pale, their bodies slight, their eyes wide with anxiety. Everyone claps and smiles, but the applause feels hollow. You sense a collective longing for something different, something freer, something less constrained by the heavy chains of tradition. Yet the old stories persist, whispered by candlelight, that only the purest blood can hold the throne, that only those of unbroken lineage can keep the kingdom safe. These stories are spells, binding the family to its own destruction, and everyone is both victim and accomplice. You end your wandering in the library, the fire burning low, the silence deep. You realize that the quest for purity has built a world of shadows and mirrors, where nothing is quite as it seems, and everyone is haunted by the fear that someday the walls will crumble and the truth will spill out for all to see. You set your candle down and watch the flame dance in the darkness, wondering if the next sunrise will bring change, or if the palace will simply close its doors a little tighter, convinced that only the pure can survive. The night deepens, and the palace hush becomes almost absolute, broken only by the slow tick of a distant clock and the quiet scurrying of mice behind the walls. You find yourself drawn toward the royal nursery, a sanctum off limits to most, but tonight the invisible rules bend for you. This is where the dynasty's hopes are swaddled and rocked, where the price of a perfect heir is paid in sleepless nights, whispered prayers, and sometimes unbearable silence. The nursery is not as grand as the throne room, or as imposing as the banquet hall, but it is the most anxious chamber in the entire palace. Here, the grand ambitions of the blue bloodline confront the brutal realities of nature. The soft glow of a lamp casts giant shadows of rocking horses and cradles on the walls. The royal nursery is crowded with expectation. Every child born here is more than just a son or daughter. They are the vessel of an entire country's future, a bundle of anxieties wrapped in linen and lace. When a royal baby enters the world, a hush falls over the palace. Physicians, midwives, and advisors gather just outside the doors, waiting for news. The hope is always the same: a strong cry, a clear gaze, limbs that move with purpose, fingers and toes accounted for. But the nursery is also a place of secrets. You notice the curtains drawn tight, the way the staff glances nervously when a child's wail sounds weak or a cough lingers too long. Here, the price of all those centuries of inbreeding is paid in full. Some children are robust and hearty, but others are born frail, delicate bones, odd features, bodies unable to withstand the onslaught of childhood fevers or the demands of learning to walk, to speak, to rule. The pressure on these little heirs is immense. In one crib, a baby sleeps fitfully, a nurse hovering nearby, counting his breaths with silent dread. The family physician leans over him, inspecting tiny joints for signs of weakness, measuring his head and jaw with calipers, noting the results in a leather-bound ledger. "He's strong," the nurse whispers, her tone pleading rather than confident. The physician says nothing, snapping the book shut with a resigned sigh. Not all children here are so closely watched. In a back room, separated by a heavy curtain, you sense the presence of those the court prefers not to mention. A pale toddler with a vacant stare rocks quietly in a chair, her nurse reading stories aloud in a trembling voice. "She's not for display," the nurse mutters when she catches you watching. "They say she'll be sent to the country soon, where the air is better. You know what that means. The country is where the fragile, the unpromising and the unwanted are quietly spirited away, out of sight, out of mind. The family tree prunes its weakest branches in silence. You picture the anxious parents, the queen, pale and sleepless, clinging to hope as her baby's fever rises in the night. The king pacing the halls, demanding reassurance from doctors who can only offer platitudes. You think of the letters sent across Europe, seeking cures, magical talismans, or the prayers of saints who, the church claims, watch over royal infants. Still, the outcome is often determined not by faith or wealth, but by the simple math of genetics. The very bloodlines they prize become a double-edged sword. Sometimes, a child is born who seems almost perfect. Rosy-cheeked, bright-eyed, quick to laugh. The palace breathes a sigh of relief. Announcements are made, bells are rung, portraits are commissioned. Yet even these victories are haunted by anxiety. Will the child survive measles, or a bad cold, or a tumble down the stairs? Will he or she reach adulthood, or will the portraits fade, the name becoming just another footnote in a family chronicle? Other times the imperfections are impossible to ignore. There is the prince with the weak heart, so often confined to bed that he knows every crack in the ceiling above his pillow. The princess with a twisted spine, who smiles bravely as she is carried to family gatherings, but never walks unaided. The infant who is born but never named, who lives only a few weeks or months before slipping away, leaving the court in mourning, and the dynasty quietly desperate. You see how the nursery staff carries the burden of these secrets. The nurses and nannies develop their own code, referring to the delicate ones and the little fighters. The physician becomes a fixture, moving from crib to crib with grim determination. sometimes summoning specialists from distant lands with exotic treatments and strange promises. The walls of the nursery are lined not only with toys and blankets but with remedies: amber beads for teething, vials of bitter medicine for fevers, amulets meant to ward off the evil eye. Yet there is love here too, a fierce, desperate love that tries to shield these children from the harsh judgments of the world outside. You watch a nurse press a kiss to the forehead of a boy who struggles to hold his head up, whispering a promise that she will never leave him alone in the dark. In another corner, a young mother sings a lullaby, her voice thick with tears, hoping her song will be enough to keep her baby safe, if only for one more night. Sometimes, the children survive against all odds, and the court begins to believe in miracles again. These stories are told and retold, embroidered with hope and bravado. She was so small, the midwife thought she'd never last the night, but look at her now. The miracle children become symbols, proof that the line endures. Yet everyone knows how fragile the triumph really is. The shadows linger though. The ones who do not thrive are quietly erased from memory. Portraits disappear, names vanish from the record books, and even the nursery staff are forbidden to speak of the lost children. You hear an old nurse, her voice trembling with both sorrow and defiance, whisper, "They think if they don't name them, the pain will fade," but it never does. You notice too the way the older children are treated. The boys and girls who make it past infancy are subjected to endless scrutiny. Every cough, every stumble, every moment of sadness is examined for signs of weakness. Tutors report on their students' progress with coded language. He is lively though easily tired, or she shows promise, but is delicate of mind. The pressure is relentless. Even their laughter is measured. Too loud and it's a sign of nervousness. Too soft and it's seen as a lack of confidence. In the nursery, you find the toys the children are meant to love: rocking horses, painted wooden soldiers, dolls with porcelain faces. Yet some toys sit untouched, gathering dust. For some of these royal children, play is a luxury, something for stronger bodies and more carefree hearts. You slip out of the nursery, pausing to listen at the door. You hear the lullabies fading into silence, the slow, measured breathing of a household always waiting for the next crisis. You sense the exhaustion in every adult who passes by, each carrying a burden too heavy for words. You walk down a hallway lined with portraits of royal children, some who grew up to rule, some whose lives flickered out before they could be crowned. You notice how the painters try to capture hope in each face, a subtle promise of strength and promise. Yet you can see it now, the uncertainty, the anxiety behind every painted smile. The further you go, the more you realize that the price of a perfect heir isn't just paid by the children themselves. The entire court is held hostage by the hope and fear that swirl through the nursery. Every minor illness is a potential disaster. Every recovery is a reason for celebration, no matter how fleeting. You remember a joke whispered by an exhausted governess. If only royal babies came with instructions. It's a small moment of levity, a brief rebellion against the heavy weight of expectation. The other staff laugh just for a moment before falling silent once more. Outside, dawn is breaking. The world stirs, and with it, the hopes and fears of another day. The nursery doors remain closed, its secrets safe for now. You move on, knowing that the quest for a perfect heir, the relentless pursuit of unblemished lineage, comes at a cost no crown can ever fully repay. You step softly into a palace haunted by childhood, where the walls seem to lean in as if listening for another faint royal cry. Tonight, your feet lead you into the echo of one of history's most tragic nurseries, a Spanish castle shrouded in gloom, where the ghost of a boy king lingers, as delicate and doomed as a frostbitten blossom. His name is whispered with both pity and discomfort. Charles II, last Habsburg king of Spain, living proof that too much purity could unravel an empire. It's a winter evening in Madrid. The tapestries hang heavy and damp on the stone walls. The candlelight does its best to soften the gloom, but even the golden glow seems exhausted here. You pass through a maze of rooms where time seems stuck, each a tiny private stage for a drama that played out over decades. Charles's story begins as all royal stories do, with hope, heraldry, and desperate prayers for a healthy heir. But from the moment he draws his first breath, the palace knows the old system has failed. You peer into the birthing chamber. Midwives exchange anxious glances. The queen, spent and pale, clutches her newborn close, but the infant's cry is feeble. He is small and frail, his features unmistakably Habsburg: prominent jaw, weak chin, an oddly shaped head that doesn't quite fit the family crown. From the start, Charles is watched, not just as a future king, but as a warning, living evidence that a family can turn inward for too long. He is christened with a dozen titles and 100 expectations, but whispers float from the nursemaids to the priests. He is not well. You wander the castle and feel the tension, the way the entire court is bent around the fragile axis of this one little boy. Every cough is an omen. Every fever is cause for panic. Each night his mother prays not just for his soul, but for the survival of Spain itself. The royal nursery, usually a place of soft laughter and bright toys, is subdued. Charles's world is small. Shaded windows, guarded doors, cautious tutors. He's not allowed to play rough, lest he bruise too easily. His food is soft, his tutors gentle, his routines unbroken, and still, illness clings to him like a shadow. The court physicians come and go, clutching their potions and charms, prescribing everything from powdered pearls to donkey's milk. He'll be strong, they insist. But in their eyes, you see the truth. The king's body is betraying the king's blood. You watch as Charles struggles to speak, his jaw too heavy, his tongue thick. Words emerge slow and slurred. Sometimes, his mind wanders off mid-sentence. He falls behind other children, unable to walk unaided, until he's almost 4. The palace gossips, servants, courtiers, even distant relatives begin to murmur. Some say he's bewitched, others blame the queen, or whisper about the sins of old kings. But the truth, clear as day, is etched in his face, a map of family choices repeated too often. As Charles grows, the pressure mounts. Spain is not a country where the king can simply be a figurehead. There are wars to fight, treaties to sign, lands to govern. The boy king, however, is always sheltered, kept behind walls thick enough to stifle even hope. The court develops a ritual: parade Charles on feast days, prop him up on a gilded cushion, hide his trembling hands under velvet sleeves. The people cheer because they must, but their eyes are wary, and the air in the square is thick with uncertainty. Inside the palace, tutors try to educate the young king: Latin, Spanish, French, arithmetic. Each lesson is a struggle. Sometimes Charles listens, sometimes he stares out the window, lost in his own world. When he's frustrated, he weeps. When he's happy, it is fleeting, a brief flare of childish delight before the exhaustion sets in again. The tutors record their progress in code. The king is attentive today, meaning he didn't fall asleep. The king recited his prayers, meaning he remembered most of the words. Behind closed doors, Charles is protected, too protected. Perhaps the queen and her ladies dote on him, treating him as both treasure and fragile glass. The boy is never allowed to play outside without a retinue of guards and physicians, lest he trip and injure himself. The other children, noble cousins brought in to be companions, learn quickly that their job is not to challenge him, but to coddle, to support, to laugh at his jokes and never let him feel alone. But you can see the loneliness in his eyes, the yearning to be just a boy, to run and tumble and scrape his knees without the entire country holding its breath. The castle becomes a kind of prison, beautiful but suffocating. You can almost hear the walls whisper, "Survive, little king, survive, for all our sakes." But sometimes Charles disappears into himself, escaping the pressure through long silences, sudden tears, or fits of laughter that fade too quickly. The courtiers call him sensitive. The servants, when they're sure no one is listening, call him cursed. Every royal family has its secrets, but in Spain, Charles is the secret no one can hide. As he approaches adolescence, his problems become harder to ignore. His body grows awkwardly. He is unusually tall, but so thin and frail that his robes seem to swallow him whole. He suffers from constant stomach pain. His speech is slurred, and sometimes he seems confused by even simple instructions. The physicians suggest new treatments, leeches, elixirs, holy relics from distant monasteries, but nothing truly helps. Even the Pope is petitioned for prayers, as if a miracle might mend what generations of inbreeding have broken. The court does what it always does. It pretends. Portraits are carefully posed, showing Charles with a regal bearing, hiding his weak chin and uncertain eyes in shadow. On public occasions he is propped up and prompted, the illusion of strength maintained for as long as the crowd is watching. Behind closed doors the mood is somber, the conversations tense. The Queen writes desperate letters to relatives in Vienna and Paris, seeking advice, treatments, even suitable brides. The hope is that marriage, another strategic union, might somehow fix what centuries have undone. And so, the next act in Charles's tragedy begins. The search for a wife. It is a process fraught with irony, since everyone knows the king's health is precarious, and his ability to produce an heir is in question. Still, a match is made, first with a French princess, then with an Austrian one. Each bride arrives full of hope, greeted with fanfare, but soon discovers that her primary role is not to be a partner, but to be a miracle worker. The pressure to conceive a healthy heir is unbearable. Every missed period is cause for panic, every miscarriage a national crisis. The palace becomes a haunted nursery once again. Only this time it is a queen who paces the halls, praying for a sign of life that will never come. Charles, increasingly ill, drifts further away. He spends his days in bed, attended by doctors, priests, and well-meaning courtiers. The rituals of kingship continue, state councils, royal audiences, ceremonies, but the king himself is fading. The courtiers begin to position themselves for the inevitable end, whispering alliances in corners, preparing for a world without a Habsburg heir. As you wander these rooms, you catch glimpses of other hidden tragedies. Letters written in spidery script, begging for help, bottles of medicine, lined up on a shelf, promising relief, but delivering only disappointment. A pair of small shoes, never worn. You realize that the palace itself is tired, weighed down by the sorrow of a family that tried too hard to keep itself separate. Charles II dies young, only 39, but his story is that of a child who never truly had a chance. The people mourn their king, but the truth is that Spain mourns something greater, the dream of a perfect, unbroken line. With Charles's death, the Spanish Habsburg dynasty ends, undone not by war or rebellion, but by the quiet, insistent unraveling of its own blood. You walk out onto a balcony in the pre-dawn chill, looking out over the city. The towers of Madrid pierce the mist, and somewhere, church bells begin to toll. In the silence, you think about the cost of purity, the lives constrained, the futures lost, the dreams that flickered and died in the shadow of the throne. In the end, Charles's legacy is more than just tragedy. His story becomes a lesson, whispered from nursemaid to nursery, from queen to daughter. It is a warning etched in every stone of the palace, that no family, however powerful, can bend nature forever. That sometimes the greatest strength is not found in keeping the bloodline pure, but in letting it run free. As the bells ring out, you let yourself hope that the dawn brings change, and that somewhere in the palace, a child wakes to a gentler future. The candles gutter in their holders as you make your way through another set of velvet-draped doors, the air thick with old perfume and even older secrets. Tonight you move, step by careful step, into the halls of France, a land of silk and intrigue, of fountains splashing in manicured gardens and masked balls that last until the golden light of dawn. Here, behind the elaborate mirrors of Versailles and the hushed tapestries of the Louvre, the question of blood has always run beneath the surface, shaping destinies in ways that the courtiers dare not say aloud. If Spain had Charles II trapped, tragic, and doomed, France had its own share of fragile monarchs, heirs sculpted by the same centuries-old obsession with bloodlines, beauty, and the tight circles of royal marriage. You arrive on a spring evening, the palace gardens heady with night-blooming flowers, and the air electric with anticipation. A masked ball is underway. Swirling gowns, elaborate wigs, and laughter that flutters like moths in the candlelight. On the surface it is dazzling, a world painted in gold leaf and crystal. But as you drift through the crowd, you notice the careful choreography, the way the courtiers size each other up, weighing alliances with a glance. There's a sharp awareness here, a quiet calculation behind every smile. The king, Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, glows at the center of this universe, surrounded by family and favorites. Yet even he is shaped by the lineage that made him, the product of cousins joined for strategy, of Bourbon ambition stitched with Valois and Habsburg thread. France's royal nursery, like Spain's, is a place of high anxiety and heavy expectations. In the bright morning hours, the royal physician and the governess confer in whispers, examining the new dauphin for any sign of frailty or imperfection. Louis XIV's own childhood was shadowed by loss, 2 siblings dead before their time, a father snatched away by illness, a mother who grieved but also steeled herself to ensure her son would survive. The court remembers. The Bourbon blood is strong, they say, but their eyes betray the fear that even the sunniest lineage can be clouded by a single storm. You pass through the children's wing, where miniature thrones line the walls and lessons are conducted in Latin, etiquette, and the subtle arts of survival. The Bourbon princes are paraded before ambassadors, their posture and poise scrutinized almost as much as their health. Every cough, every stumble, every sign of weakness is noted in official records. Sometimes in code, the dauphin seems delicate, one tutor writes, which everyone understands to mean he may not last the year. The obsession with blood carries a different edge here in France. The court, always alert to scandal, masks its anxieties in wit and wordplay. A noblewoman jokes that her cousin's nose is so Bourbon it could open a wine bottle on its own, and the room erupts in polite laughter. But beneath the humour there's a current of dread. Everyone knows the stories of weak heirs, of secret illnesses and sudden deaths. Everyone remembers the fevers that swept through the nursery, the days when the palace went silent save for the tolling of church bells and the rustle of mourning veils. The French kings learned to hide their fragility behind spectacle and ritual. At Versailles, each day is choreographed down to the minute. The king's rising, his meals, his audiences, his strolls through the gardens. The court participates in this grand ballet, hoping that routine can shield them from chaos. The king's body is not his own. It is a symbol, a stage upon which the future of France is played out. When Louis XIV's son, the Grand Dauphin, falls ill, the entire country waits in breathless suspense, as if the fate of a nation might turn on a single heartbeat. In quieter moments you slip away from the noise, wandering into the smaller, more intimate spaces of royal life. Here you see the cracks beneath the surface, a princess resting in a darkened room, her governess wringing her hands over a persistent cough, a prince refusing his lessons, his mind drifting sublime, far from Latin declensions and heraldic charts. You find the queen in her private chapel, kneeling for hours, her whispered prayers as desperate as any peasant's. The pressure on France's royal children is enormous. Some bear it with stoic grace, growing into their roles with the confidence of their ancestors. Others falter. The Bourbon line, so proud of its history, is also littered with lost hopes. Infants who never see their first birthday, teenagers stricken by sudden illness, heirs who crack under the weight of expectation. The official history smooth over these tragedies, but the palace remembers. In the margins of old ledgers, you find traces. The child is sickly, but we hope. She is clever, but melancholic. Even in the sunlight, there are shadows. You recall a joke from the kitchens. Every time the king sneezes, the whole court catches cold. It's funny, but also painfully true. The health of the monarch is the health of France, and when the royal line stumbles, the country trembles with it. You wander through the hall of mirrors, lost in the endless reflections, and imagine the countless eyes that have watched, worried, and waited. The faces repeat over and over: young, old, proud, anxious, mirroring the same fears from generation to generation. The great secret of Versailles is that its beauty is built on fragile foundations. Every gold panel and polished floor conceals a history of anxiety, sacrifice, and silent suffering. At night, the palace settles into uneasy sleep. You listen to the slow breathing of the royal children, the soft steps of nurses checking on them in the dark. Somewhere, a mother weeps quietly, mourning a child gone too soon, or praying for the strength to protect the one she has left. The royal physicians make their rounds, muttering about humours and bloodlines, their treatments more superstition than science. Occasionally, the facade cracks, and grief spills into the open. After a royal funeral, the whole court dons mourning black, and for a time, laughter fades from the halls. But always, the rituals resume. New heirs are born, and the cycle begins again. The drive for continuity, for a future secured by blood, is relentless. Yet, amidst the sorrow, there is resilience. Some heirs do thrive, growing strong and clever, dazzling the court with wit or valour. When the Sun King's great-grandson, Louis V, is born, the whole court rejoices. France endures, the courtiers proclaim, and for a time, hope feels real. But even then, the anxiety never fully lifts. The palace lives in constant awareness that fortune is fickle, and that the next storm may be already gathering on the horizon. You think of all the children who have passed through these halls, the laughing, the weeping, the ones whose names have faded from history. For every king who wore the crown, there were a dozen siblings and cousins whose lives were shaped by the same forces, the same relentless demand for strength and purity. Stepping outside into the gardens, you watch the sunrise paint gold across the fountains. You wonder if these fragile monarchs ever found moments of true joy, or if the weight of inheritance pressed too heavily on even their happiest days. The peacocks shriek, the gardeners trim their hedges, and the world goes on. Each day a performance on the grand stage of French history. You realize that the story of France's fragile monarchs is not just a tale of suffering or sorrow, but of endurance. The refusal to give in, even when the odds are stacked by nature and tradition alike. In every painted portrait, every carefully preserved letter, every whispered story passed from servant to servant, there's a flicker of something like hope. As you wander away from Versailles, your footsteps echoing on marble floors, you carry with you the sense that beneath the grandeur, beneath the masks, the old longing persists, that the next child, the next heir, the next sunrise might finally bring peace and strength to the royal line. You move now into the quieter chambers, places where the light is dimmer and the air tastes of lavender sachets and old tears. The palace grows more intimate here, corridors narrowing, the scent of medicinal herbs drifting beneath the doors. You find yourself in rooms where the curtains are kept drawn during the day, where footfalls are muffled and voices even more so. This is where the stories of mad queens and melancholy princes begin, where inbreeding's legacy isn't written in jawlines or bloodlines, but in the far more mysterious territory of the mind. It's easy to imagine the royal family as a collection of statues, stoic, perfect, unmoving, but history tells a stranger story. You settle by the fire in a shadowed sitting room and listen to the hush. Here, the conversation is softer, the laughter edged with nervousness, as if every joke might be overheard by ears that remember too much. In this hush, you hear the footsteps of all those heirs and queens, whose minds became the palace's most carefully guarded secrets. The royal line, you realize, doesn't just pass on blue eyes and strong jaws. It carries with it the invisible inheritance, the flicker of anxiety, the shadow of sadness, the storm cloud of madness that can darken a mind or steal it away altogether. For centuries, the ruling houses of Europe clung to their purity, sealing every loophole with another cousin's hand, never suspecting that something far more dangerous was brewing in their own heads. You recall stories whispered in every European court of kings who locked themselves away and refused to speak for days, of queens whose tempers blazed one moment and wept the next, of princes who wandered the gardens at midnight, muttering to ghosts, or whose laughter rang too loud at dinner before dissolving into silence. Madness, melancholy, Fits and fugues. These were as much a part of royal life as crowns and coronations, though spoken of only in code if at all. You imagine a chilly morning in Vienna, a Rarity of Portugal, a queen whose mind, after years of stress, grief and perhaps more than a dash of royal inbreeding, unravels in her middle age. The priests whisper prayers in her presence, but the real ritual is the routine of concealment, screening off the world, inventing excuses, telling the people their queen is merely fatigued, her son rules in her name, the court does its best to function, and the queen is tended like a sick flower, hidden from view, her sorrow treated as a threat to the very stability of the realm. It's not just the Portuguese court, of course. In Bavaria, you might meet King Ludwig II, Mad King Ludwig, who preferred castles to councils and fairy tales to statecraft. His mind drifted further from the world each year, his fantasies growing grander as his grip on reality loosened. Ministers fretted, doctors diagnosed from behind locked doors, and finally, his own government declared him insane. A verdict as much about politics as medicine, but the line between melancholy and madness was always blurred. Sometimes what was called madness was just grief that never healed, or a mind too sensitive for the brutal business of rule. In the French court, there were princes and princesses whose lives were coloured by sadness, so profound that even the sun-drenched halls of Versailles felt too dim. They wrote poetry in secret, painted dark scenes behind closed doors, and sometimes simply faded from court life, their absence explained away by nerves or delicate health. You return to the English court for a moment, to George III, the king who lost America and then lost himself, succumbing to bouts of confusion, rage and confusion again. His madness was a national tragedy and a political crisis. The doctors came and went, administering every remedy from leeches to cold baths. Parliament debated what to do. The family grieved and hid the worst of it from the public. The king, for his part, wandered in and out of clarity, sometimes recognizing his own children, sometimes mistaking them for ghosts. What did all these royals have in common, besides their crowns? A web of ancestry so tangled it was hard to find an ancestor who wasn't also a cousin. As medical knowledge grew, so did the awareness, slowly, grudgingly, that certain weaknesses ran not just in families but in the very blue blood meant to keep them safe. The private tutors and royal physicians developed a language for these troubles, a way to explain away the inexplicable. Melancholy was a favourite, an elegant word for depression. Nerves covered everything from panic attacks to catatonia. Fits of temper excused rages that left firths trembling. Fainting spells and vapours covered breakdowns and psychosis. The words shifted with the times, but the symptoms stayed. Behind every diagnosis, a frightened family tried to pretend nothing was wrong. You wander past rooms where thick carpets muffle every sound and thick curtains block every ray of light. In some, a royal woman sits at a writing desk, scribbling feverishly, letters never sent, journals that become a lifeline. In others, a prince stares out the window for hours, unmoving. At dinner, a sudden silence falls when the wrong subject is raised. Everyone knows not to mention the queen's sudden shrieks, or the prince's days in bed, or the way the duke sometimes fails to recognize his own children. The cost of silence is heavy. You hear it in the laughter that's a shade too brittle, in the music that drifts down the halls at midnight, in the careful steps of those tasked with keeping the peace. Palace gossip is always hungry, but on this topic even the boldest whisperers lower their voices. Sometimes there are moments of mercy. You watch as a governess reads quietly to a princess prone to fits of weeping, her presence a gentle anchor in the storm. You see a king's favourite dog curled at his feet, the animal's calm a balm to a mind constantly at war with itself. There is love here, even if it's marked by fear. The family clings to rituals, music, prayer, garden walks, anything to impose a little order on the chaos. Other times, there is cruelty. You overhear doctors discussing treatments, ice baths, restraints, purges, sometimes even isolation in remote castles. It's for their own good, they insist, but you see the pain in the eyes of those who are sent away. The court, for all its gilded surfaces, is not a gentle place for the vulnerable. Yet, for all the suffering, there are those who learn to live with their minds on a knife edge. Some royal heirs and queens became famous for their eccentricity, their oddness excused as genius or vision. Others faded, their names footnotes in a family tree that couldn't bear too many cracks. You realize that in this world, madness and melancholy are more than afflictions. They are politics, gossip, and destiny woven together. A prince who falters can throw a kingdom into crisis. A queen's mood swings can become a matter of state. The very future of a country might hang on whether a single mind can bear the pressure of generations. As you listen to the soft rain tapping against the window panes, you imagine all the unseen battles waged behind these walls. The slow gathering of dread, the effort it takes to simply rise each morning and put on the mask of royalty, the loneliness of knowing that everyone is watching, waiting for you to break, but that no one will ever say so aloud. You pause before a mirror and see your own reflection, tired, thoughtful, perhaps a little sad. You wonder what it would be like to carry not just the weight of a crown, but the weight of history itself. To know that your every thought, every mood, every silence is scrutinized, not just by those around you, but by the ghosts of 1,000 ancestors and the hungry eyes of the world beyond the palace gates. And you understand, at last, why so many mad queens and melancholy princes haunt the stories of Europe's royal families. In a world where the mind is both the last refuge and the greatest threat, where silence is a survival strategy, it is no wonder that so many heirs found themselves lost in labyrinths no one else could see. As the palace settles into uneasy sleep, you slip away, your heart heavy for all those who suffered in silence. You promise, quietly, to remember them not for their madness or melancholy, but for their courage in surviving a world that could not or would not understand. You slip from the palace's private shadows back into its grander halls, tracing your steps through time to an age when all the world's power seemed concentrated in a handful of interwoven families. Here, beneath soaring ceilings and along flagstone corridors, you see a map not of land but of blood, a living, breathing web of cousins, siblings, uncles, and nieces, all playing the world's most dangerous game. When cousins rule everything, you step into a council chamber, its walls lined with the faded banners of kingdoms once at war, now bound together by marriage. The table is crowded with monarchs and ministers, who all look suspiciously alike, their faces echoing the same eyes, noses, and chins you've traced in portrait after portrait. You realize that these rulers aren't just allies or rivals, they're family. Sometimes they're both at once. The game is as old as royalty itself, diplomacy by way of the cradle. It's here that you glimpse the logic behind all those family trees twisted into knots. To secure peace, you marry off your daughter to your rival's son, who is also, perhaps, your cousin. You arrange a treaty at the altar, not on the battlefield. You send your spare heir across a continent to cement an alliance with a second cousin in another court, hoping their children will inherit not just titles, but safety. These arrangements are less about romance and more about insurance policies written in flesh and bone. The Habsburgs, of course, are masters of this strategy. You find a tapestry of Europe from the 16th century, each country stitched together with the gold thread of marriage. Spain, Austria, the Holy Roman Empire, bits of Italy, even the Netherlands, all ruled at least in part by someone named Charles, Ferdinand, Maria, or Philip, all cousins, sometimes several times over. The famous boast goes, "Let others wage war, you happy Austria, marry." But as you've already seen, that happiness is often more rumour than reality. As you wander the halls of Vienna, Madrid and Prague, you realise that almost every conflict in Europe, every war, every treaty, every shifting border, was at heart a family squabble. Brothers turned against brothers, cousins against cousins, uncles against nephews, the war of Spanish succession, a fight over who would inherit the throne, with half of Europe's rulers laying claim not as enemies but as blood relatives. The War of the Roses, a family feud so complicated that even the scribes gave up drawing the genealogies and just started writing cousin in the margins. You stand in a candlelit study, watching a king sign a marriage contract that will bind his daughter to a prince 2 countries away. He's not smiling, neither is she. The stakes are too high for joy. These unions are the only way to guarantee survival in a world where armies can be raised with a word and dynasties toppled overnight. You see the calculation in the king's eyes. Marry her well and the family might gain a crown. Marry her poorly and everything might be lost. But there's a cost to this ceaseless shuffling of kin. The closer the cousins, the tighter the net, the more dangerous the gamble. You find yourself at a wedding feast where the bride and groom share not just a name, but a set of grandparents. Everyone toasts the happy couple, but beneath the surface you sense anxiety. Will this union bring peace, or merely double the family's troubles? Will their children be strong enough to inherit the kingdom, or will they carry the silent curse of too much sameness in their blood? You overhear ambassadors gossiping in Latin. The king's nose is looking more Austrian every year. But the queen's chin is pure Spanish. See how it juts out. The conversation is only half in jest. Each feature is a clue, each marriage a roll of the dice. You can't help but notice how the chroniclers begin to sound like horse breeders, measuring success not in love but in hips, height, and the clarity of the family jawline. It isn't just about peace, of course. Sometimes, the whole world seems to hold its breath for a royal birth. The Pope writes prayers for the new heir. Merchants bet fortunes on the outcome. Neighbouring courts send spies to hear whispers about the baby's colour, cry, and strength. When a prince is born healthy, church bells ring. When he's sickly, the rumours start at once. Did the parents marry too close? Is the curse coming back? Sometimes the cousin wars spiral out of control. You find yourself walking the trenches of a battlefield where soldiers die for causes that began as a squabble between in-laws. You see the toll it takes on the common people. Taxes raised to pay for armies. Fields burned as kings chase after thrones they believe are theirs by right of blood. In a war room, you watch generals pin flags to maps, knowing that every flag is someone's nephew, every casualty a branch on the family tree. You see the toll it takes on the common people, taxes raised to pay for armies, fields burned as kings chase after thrones they believe are theirs by right of blood. In a war room, you watch generals pin flags to maps, knowing that every flag is someone's nephew, every casualty a branch on the family tree. You hear the stories that are never written in the official records. The king who sends his brother into exile for the crime of being too popular. The princess who is married to a foreign cousin, then forgotten in a castle far from home. The family dinners where no one trusts the wine or the conversation, where alliances shift with every whispered word, and then, unexpectedly, you come upon a moment of tenderness. 2 princesses, cousins, yes, but more like sisters meet in a rose garden, away from the eyes of court. They laugh about the seriousness of the grown-ups, about the pressure of being pawns in the world's chess game. Let them marry us off, one says. But they can't marry our hearts. For a brief moment, the heavy machinery of power and kinship pauses, and you remember that beneath the crowns and titles, these are people too. Still, the machine rolls on. In a grand hall, a family reunion is taking place, except here, everyone wears a crown. The King of Prussia chats with the Queen of Denmark, both of them tracing their ancestry back to the same German duke. The Russian Tsar and the British Prince swap childhood stories. The sense of shared destiny is overwhelming. Europe is one sprawling family, tied together by bonds both visible and invisible. The Russian Tsar and the British Prince swap childhood stories. The sense of shared destiny is overwhelming. Europe is one sprawling family, tied together by bonds both visible and invisible. You look up at the stained glass windows and see the emblems of every great house, each a variation on the same themes, each proclaiming a history of triumph and tragedy, each marking the victories and defeats of the same handful of names. You think of how quickly an enemy becomes a brother-in-law, how a rival might be a nephew by morning, and how the lines between friend and foe are blurred beyond recognition. But what happens when the system fails? When cousins, after centuries of marrying cousins, find themselves running out of options. You hear a dark joke whispered at court. Soon we'll have to start marrying the furniture. Everyone laughs, but uneasily. The family tree has grown so tight, so tangled, that it barely breathes. The risk of producing an heir who cannot rule grows with every generation. But the alternatives, marrying outsiders, risking new blood, inviting change, seem more terrifying still. You stroll out to a terrace where the stars glitter overhead, and you ponder the fragility of this world. Cousins may rule everything now, but every dynasty is only ever one unhappy marriage, one sickly child, or one ambitious uncle away from collapse. You think of all the wars, treaties and tragedies that started not with armies or diplomacy but with a wedding feast, a birth or a whispered promise in the dark. You leave the council chamber behind, the laughter and plotting fading into the night. The lesson hangs in the air. When power is kept too close, when cousins rule everything, the cost is more than just broken hearts. It is broken kingdoms, broken futures, and sometimes broken minds. You move with the hush of a secret slipping down a velvet staircase, drawn away from council rooms and coronation halls, to the places where history's official portraits look away, behind palace walls where forbidden love simmers, flickers and sometimes explodes in quiet desperation. Here, the great experiment of royal inbreeding is not simply a matter of genetics or diplomacy, it is also a cauldron of longing, frustration, and tangled hearts. Every palace hides stories that were never supposed to see the light of day, and tonight you're slipping through their cracks. You step into a winter-lit hallway where tapestries muffle your footfalls. Here, amid the chill and perfume, you feel the tension that lives between desire and duty, a tension as old as any kingdom. The royal family, so obsessed with purity of blood and clarity of inheritance, must also defend itself against the chaos of human feeling. Sometimes they win, more often they don't. You glimpse the edge of a silk gown vanishing into a shadowy antechamber, a pair of boots abandoned by a window, a hastily dropped handkerchief with a prince's embroidered initials. Behind these small tokens lies a world of rules stretched to breaking, of glances held too long at feasts, of laughter that bubbles over during stiff formal dinners. When cousins rule everything, and marriage is arranged like a chessboard, the forbidden becomes both inevitable and irresistible. Royal love affairs are, by necessity, stories of secrecy and risk. There are the obvious reasons. A scandal could destroy a dynasty, topple a throne, or at the very least spawn an avalanche of ugly pamphlets and even uglier rumours. But there is another, quieter reason too. For many princes and princesses, love becomes a rebellion, a last patch of wildness in a garden of clipped hedges and mapped-out marriages. You imagine a young princess, betrothed to a cousin she barely knows. Her wedding dress is being sewn in another room while she reads love poems by candlelight, her heart fluttering not for the dull, duty-bound bridegroom, but for a court musician with clever fingers. He plays the lute in the garden. She sneaks away from her tutors, eager for 5 stolen minutes by the fountain. They exchange letters in books, kisses behind columns, vows whispered in the hush of the maze. The governess pretends not to notice, but the servants see all. And what of the king's favourite? The gentleman-in-waiting, whose devotion outlasts every treaty, whose presence lingers in the king's private chambers long after the rest of the court has retired. Sometimes forbidden love is a matter of gender, sometimes of class, but always of danger. The stakes are higher than heartbreak. Discovery means disgrace or worse. A prince banished to a far-off abbey, a lady-in-waiting sent to a nunnery, a child whisked away and hidden forever. Yet the risk only sharpens the thrill. Royal diaries, where they exist, are riddled with coded passages. Walked in the garden after supper, saw the moonlight upon the pond. Between the lines, met him there, touched his hand, or, in a queen's hand, prayed long tonight. But the prayer was for courage, for one more night of secret joy before the weight of duty returns at sunrise. Not every forbidden love ends in tragedy, but few end happily. You slip into a gallery of portraits and see the evidence in their eyes, resignation, longing, sometimes a glint of secret knowledge. These are faces that have learned to hide their stories. Some queens become experts in silence, wielding it like a shield. Others retreat into illness or melancholy, their passion forced inward until it becomes a ghost in the blood. Affairs are not just romantic, either. They're political. The wrong lover can mean the end of a family's ambitions. The right lover, discreet, clever, useful, can mean survival, information, even power. Royal mistresses and favourites become power brokers in their own right, wielding influence with a word or a glance, their fortunes tied as tightly as any royal signature. Sometimes, love breaks the rules so completely that the court must scramble to catch up. You recall the story of a king who fell for a commoner, an actress, perhaps, or a lady's maid with eyes the colour of storm clouds. The court is aghast. The marriage is forbidden. But the king is stubborn. There are tears, threats, perhaps even a war. In the end, sometimes love wins, but it always leaves scars. More often, though, the affair ends as all palace secrets do, with a quiet fading away, the lovers part, their letters burned, their names erased from the official histories. Occasionally, a child is born, a little too fair, a little too musical, with eyes that match the gardener's, not the king's. These children, sometimes beloved, more often hidden or sent away, are another price paid for the impossible expectations of the dynasty. You notice how forbidden love and family secrecy twist together, binding the palace tighter and tighter. Every new scandal threatens to bring the whole edifice down, yet every generation repeats the cycle. It's as if the family cannot help itself, compelled by the same stubbornness that kept the bloodline pure. The difference is, love, unlike blood, is not so easily contained. You wander through a candlelit hallway lined with doors. Behind one, a royal bride is weeping softly, the echoes of her sobs lost in velvet drapery. Her husband, the distant cousin, is away, perhaps with his own lover, perhaps with a bottle of wine and his hunting dogs. Marriage is public, but loneliness is private. The princess, taught all her life that love is secondary to duty, dreams of escape. Sometimes she writes poetry, sometimes she prays for change, most often she waits. There are lighter moments too, even laughter. You recall a joke whispered among the ladies in waiting. If you want to know who a princess loves, watch who walks her dog. The court is a tangle of gossip, signals, and double meanings. Everyone is watching, but nobody sees everything. Yet the palace is full of ghosts, lovers who vanished, scandals swept under Turkish carpets, children whose portraits were never painted. Sometimes in the quiet of the chapel, you sense their presence most keenly. A certain window seat always dusted, never used. A rose bush in the garden planted for a lost friend. The history books may not remember them, but the palace does. Forbidden love is not only a curse, it's sometimes a balm. In a world of arranged marriages and calculated alliances, the heart's rebellion offers a taste of freedom. It is the tiny crack through which hope and light slip into an otherwise stifling room. You find yourself by a moonlit pond in the palace gardens. The air is cool and still. Somewhere, a pair of lovers meet, their hands brushing just long enough to promise everything and nothing at once. Tomorrow, they will pretend not to know each other, but tonight, they are just two souls in the dark, their royal blood for a moment forgotten. As you return to the palace, you reflect on all you have seen, the marriages of strategy, the heirs born of calculation, and the secret lives lived in the margins. You understand now that for every story of monstrous heirs, there are also stories of forbidden longing, of courage and vulnerability, of people trying to claim a little happiness in a world that demands perfection. The palace breathes and settles, shadows lengthen, and the secrets remain, stitched into every stone. In the end, you realize it is not just blood that shapes a dynasty, but the restless, reckless hearts that beat within its walls. As the palace quiets in the deep hours of the night, you find yourself drifting not through ballrooms or nurseries, but through a labyrinth of echoing chambers, filled with the tools of desperation. Rooms where hope and fear meet in the clatter of glass vials, the murmur of prayer, the scribble of quills on parchment. This is the kingdom of doctors, alchemists, and desperate remedies. The forbidden, complicated love stories may have played out by moonlight, but the fate of monstrous heirs and fragile queens is often written in the cold light of medical necessity. In these hidden rooms, every oddity of body or mind has its corresponding cure. The royal physician is both revered and feared, for his words carry the power to shape the future of nations. It is a heavy burden to diagnose a prince's lameness, a princess's pallor, a king's madness, and then to offer comfort or hope, even when neither are truly possible. Tonight, you slip behind a heavy door and into the apothecary, where shelves are crowded with jars of every imaginable powder, herb and potion. Leeches wriggle in glass jars, next to vials of ground pearl, snakeskin and imported spices worth more than gold. A sleepy apprentice measures out dried foxglove. A physician grinds antimony and cinnamon into a mortar. The air is thick with the scent of camphor and desperation. You watch as the physician prepares his rounds. He has a reputation for tact. When the queen's son can't speak, he calls it infantile reticence. When a daughter has fits, it's a humoral disturbance. And when the king's jaw juts out and he cannot chew, the physician prescribes soft bread and bone broth, muttering about constitutional peculiarities. Behind his careful language lies an unspoken knowledge. These children are not merely sick, they are the living ledger of a dynasty's mistakes. The royal medical staff live in a world of perpetual worry. Every cough, every rash, every slow milestone in the nursery is cause for alarm. You hear the whisper of a midwife last time. The babe never woke up. This one, at least, cried. In this world, a crying infant is a sign of hope. A silent one is a calamity. And so, the cures come thick and fast. Some are gentle, lavender baths for melancholy, honeyed wine for sleeplessness, chamomile poultices for weak eyes. Others are more aggressive, even alarming bleedings, purgings, purges with mercury or antimony, the application of Spanish flies, beetles, ground and sprinkled on skin to create a fever, and in theory, drive out illness. The wisdom of the age is a stew of science, superstition, and desperation. You watch a scene unfold in a candlelit sick room. A trembling nurse presents a feverish child to the physician. He inspects the child's tongue, then orders a bloodletting. Later he instructs the court alchemist to prepare a tincture of gold and rose petals, which the child is forced to swallow. If the fever breaks, the treatment is praised. If the child weakens, the blame falls on bad air, a mother's fault, or quietly on the old curse of too close kin. Court alchemists hold a special place in this world. Part scientist, part sorcerer, part conman, they promise wonders, elixirs of life, tonics for fertility, powders to make the melancholic merry, or to grant strength to the weak. You see them hunched over retorts and crucibles, muttering incantations, searching for that one impossible medicine that will erase generations of inherited fragility. Of course, there are the faith healers too, monks with relics, nuns with prayers, wandering holy men who claim to have cured the incurable. The Queen's chaplain burns incense and recites litanies for the health of the royal nursery. Saints' bones are paraded through sick rooms. There are whispers that a pilgrimage, a particular icon or a generous donation to a monastery might turn the tide when all else fails. Sometimes the line between faith and medicine blurs. Physicians consult astrologers to determine the best day for bleeding a child, or to interpret a nightmare that might predict sickness or scandal. Mars is ascendant tonight, one doctor murmurs, so we'll try a mustard plaster rather than leeches. You can't help but feel sympathy for the children at the centre of these rituals, their bodies marked with the hopes and failures of everyone around them. Then there are the truly bizarre treatments. Crocodile dung used in poultices, bits of mummified flesh from Egypt ground into powder, exotic minerals brought from distant lands and prescribed by the spoonful. If something could be ingested, rubbed on the skin, or waved over a sickbed, it found its way into the royal nursery at one time or another. Anything. You hear a desperate mother whisper, "Just to see my baby smile." Yet not all the medical drama is played out on sickbeds. Sometimes the real theatre is in the court itself, where doctors compete for royal favour and rival alchemists offer competing cures. You observe two physicians arguing before a nervous king. One swears by new Dutch ideas about hygiene, the other dismisses him with a Galenic wave, muttering about humours. The courtiers place their bets, always careful to be on the winning side should the patient recover. You observe two physicians arguing before a nervous king. One swears by new Dutch ideas about hygiene, the other dismisses him with a Galenic wave, muttering about humours. The courtiers place their bets, always careful to be on the winning side should the patient recover. The stakes are never higher than when the king himself is ill. When the sovereign's life hangs in the balance, the entire realm is plunged into suspense. Criers stand ready to proclaim good or bad news. Priests pace, courtiers weep or plot, and the doctors work through the night, administering poultices, prayers, and panic in equal measure. Sometimes the king recovers, and the court breathes again. Sometimes the end comes, and all eyes turn to the next heir, hoping the new king or queen will be less fragile, or at least better cared for. You stroll through the private study of a queen who has lost more children than she can bear to name. On her desk are letters from doctors across Europe, each proposing a new theory. She tries everything. Change of air, new diet, sacred water from lords, potions promising to purify royal blood. You see the strain in her eyes. She is not only a mother but a custodian of history, carrying the burden of ensuring her line continues, whatever the cost. Not all doctors are charlatans, of course. Some are true pioneers, pushing the boundaries of medical knowledge. You meet a royal physician who has noticed a pattern. It is always the children of cousins who sicken most. Quietly he records his observations in a locked journal, daring to wonder if perhaps the old customs have been wrong all along. His findings, whispered to a select few, plant the earliest seeds of genetic understanding. A science centuries ahead of its time, but the system is slow to change. The old remedies die hard, especially when everyone involved is so desperate for hope, and sometimes the court's efforts only make things worse. A beloved prince weakened by endless bleeding, a princess driven to madness by isolation and treatments that do more harm than good. You notice too the desperation of the staff. Nurses and nannies, sworn to silence, carry tales from one chamber to the next. The miraculous recovery of a child after being given the black draught from a travelling monk. The mysterious illness that swept through the nursery after a comet's passing. Each new story is both a comfort and a warning. Yet despite the confusion, the pain and the loss, there is also remarkable resilience. Some royal children, battered by potions and leeches and prayers, manage to grow strong. They survive, not because of the cures but in spite of them. Their stories become legend, proof. The court insists that the line can endure, that hope is never truly lost. You leave the apothecary behind, the scent of rosemary and rue clinging to your clothes. As you pass through the sleeping palace, you reflect on all you've seen, the determined faces of doctors, the anxious eyes of queens, the endless search for something to fix what cannot be fixed. In the end, you realize the story of royal medicine is not just a tale of ignorance or superstition. It is a story of love, of hope, and of a world that refused to give up, no matter how many times it was proven wrong. A cold dawn creeps across the palace roofs, illuminating stained glass and gilded crosses, as you find yourself wandering into the sanctum of Europe's other power, the church. The smell of incense and candle wax clings to the air. Velvet kneelers are still warm from last night's prayers. If you listen closely, you can hear the echo of centuries, priests reciting litanies for royal infants, bishops blessing marriages between nervous cousins, and popes poring over genealogical charts as anxiously as any ambitious monarch. For in the grand play of royal inbreeding, the papal seal is as vital as any marriage contract, and faith and fate are hopelessly tangled. This is the kingdom of blood, blame and doctrine. The rules about who may wed whom are ancient and on the surface, absolute. The book of Leviticus is explicit. Certain unions are forbidden, their punishment divine, yet The reality of power, you quickly realize, is more flexible. Royalty always finds a loophole, and the church in its earthly wisdom learns to bend with the times, so long as the correct fees, favors, or future alliances are promised. You pause in a vast marble corridor, lined with portraits of popes. Their eyes are stern, their fingers raised in blessing or warning. Some are remembered as reformers, others as cunning politicians. All have been approached by desperate kings and queens, clutching letters written in midnight anxiety. Your Holiness, my daughter and nephew must marry, for the good of the realm, or more bluntly, if you deny us, there will be war. The papal answer is rarely simple. On the one hand, the church must guard its laws. Marriage between close kin is a sin, a danger to the soul and to society. On the other hand, what is sin, if not an opportunity for redemption or negotiation? And so, through centuries, a special papal magic grows. The dispensation. A dispensation is not a pardon, but a permission slip, written in Latin and sealed with gold, allowing what God's law in theory forbids. You imagine the whispered bargains, a king promising to fund a crusade, a queen's family donating a new cathedral wing, an embassy arriving with gifts of silk and silver. In return, the Pope agrees that, for the good of Christendom, a cousin may marry a cousin, or even an uncle may wed a niece. The family tree loops tighter, the blood grows thicker, and the church's coffers grow heavier. Yet these permissions come with a price, not only in gold but in secrets. Every dispensation is a tacit admission that something isn't right, that the old ways come with risk. The church's blessing does not erase the danger of monstrous heirs. It merely cloaks it in a haze of incense and official silence. You wander through an archive where scribes labor over thick chained books, copying out the details of royal marriages for the Vatican record. Their Latin is careful, their faces drawn. Another dispensation for the Habsburgs, one mutters, as if saying the same prayer for the 100th time. Some scribes leave little marks in the margins, notes of doubt, or the unspoken hope that this time the match will not end in tragedy. But the church's role is more than paperwork. Priests and bishops act as advisors, confessors, even matchmakers. A nervous princess is told her wedding is God's will. A prince is assured that his union, though unusual, is sanctified by Rome itself. Sermons thunder from cathedral pulpits. The safety of the kingdom is the safety of the faith. Yet, behind closed doors, the same preachers may mutter that God never meant for so many cousins to marry, nor for so many prayers to be whispered over sick beds. Sometimes the pious fiction cracks. You hear of children born wrong with bodies twisted or minds dimmed, whisked away to distant convents or monasteries. The church becomes a refuge and a hiding place, sheltering those heirs whose presence would embarrass a dynasty. Here, in the hush of cloistered gardens and sunlit chapels, you glimpse boys and girls with royal profiles and haunted eyes, their stories unspoken and their names quietly changed. You watch a confessor listening to a queen's secrets, her guilt about a lost child, her fear that her marriage, though blessed by the church, has brought a curse instead of a miracle. The priest reassures her suffering is the fate of saints, and the family sacrifices are a holy offering. But you see the shadow in the queen's eyes. She suspects that some burdens are too heavy even for faith to lift. In moments of crisis, the palace chapel is packed, courtiers and servants crowding in to pray for a sickly heir or a troubled king. The bishops lead processions, swinging censers and chanting psalms, their eyes fixed on the altar but their minds on the line of succession. In Rome, the Pope receives urgent messengers, each bearing the same message. The realm trembles. Our prince is ill. Intercede with God. Sometimes the prayers are answered. More often, the world keeps spinning, indifferent to either hope or despair. Yet the church's influence is not always gentle. There are times when it twists itself into knots to justify what must not be spoken aloud. Theologies are invented, Bible verses reinterpreted, saints invoked who never existed, all for the sake of keeping the crown on a familiar head and the family name on the lips of every parish priest. Occasionally, you catch a whiff of scandal, the cardinal who questions a royal marriage too boldly, the nun who gossips about a hidden princess, the local bishop who dares to refuse a dispensation. Sometimes such people rise no higher, sometimes they vanish altogether. The palace walls are thick, and secrets are easily buried. You listen to the confessions of servants who have seen too much, the midwife who held a silent baby, the valet who covered bruises, the tutor who watched his pupils slip away into madness. They light candles and pray, but some wounds, you realize, cannot be soothed by ritual alone. Still, the church holds fast to its power. The rituals continue: weddings, baptisms, funerals, each one a performance meant to reassure both heaven and earth that all is well. But beneath the hymns and holy water you sense a growing awareness, even among the faithful, that something is deeply wrong. A priest lingers after Mass, lost in thought. A bishop studies a family tree with a frown, turning the pages back and forth, searching for the moment when the line bent too far. As you leave the sanctuary, the bells toll for a wedding, echoing over rooftops and into the city beyond. You wonder how many times these walls have heard the same vows, the same promises, the same anxious prayers, and you wonder too if those who stand at the altar believe in their secret hearts that the blessings of the church are enough to keep fate at bay. You step into the sunlight, feeling the weight of centuries in your bones. In the world outside, people marry for love or for luck. Inside the palace, inside the church, every union is a negotiation with both heaven and heredity, both sin and survival. In the end, you realize the papal seal may offer comfort, but it cannot erase the consequences. Blood, blame, and the church are forever entwined in Europe's royal story. Each blessing shadowed by a secret, each prayer whispered against the relentless tide of history. You pass beneath an archway heavy with the scent of old wax and wilted flowers, moving toward the most secret places of the palace. Rooms seldom discussed in histories, corridors that bend and twist away from the public eye. Here, the real human cost of inbreeding is hidden, though its effects echo through every marble hall and gilded gallery. In this section, the monstrous heirs of Europe's royal dynasties are not only whispered about, they are paraded, pitied, or when shame overcomes pride, quietly shut away. It's easy, when reading old chronicles or gazing at flattering portraits, to think of royalty as a realm of glittering perfection, but these corridors are proof that even the most powerful cannot escape the consequences of their own rules. You slip into a shadowed antechamber where a faded tapestry nearly hides a small locked door. Behind it lies a reality the royal family would rather you never see. Some of Europe's royal children, born of looping bloodlines and dynasties determined to keep the crown in the family, were marked from the very beginning. Their bodies or minds bore the unmistakable signs of generations of inbreeding: twisted limbs, frail hearts, clouded thoughts, or faces that recalled the long, heavy Habsburg jaw or the melancholy eyes of a mad queen. For some, these features were mere eccentricities. For others, they were the difference between a life in the light and a life behind a locked door. You find a nursery where portraits are never painted. The staff move quietly, their uniforms neat but their eyes wary. In one cradle lies a prince with hands that do not open, whose gaze floats past the faces of those who try to comfort him. In another corner, a princess sits in a wheeled chair, her legs curled and useless, but her laughter bright and wild, allowed to play only when the curtains are drawn tight against prying eyes. Sometimes these monstrous heirs were presented to the world, albeit briefly and always with careful management. You recall the story of Joanna of Castile, Juana la Loca, who was paraded at her wedding with all the pomp and hope Spain could muster. Yet, as her mind frayed in adulthood, she became both an embarrassment and a living warning. A tragic figure shuffled between castles, a pawn claimed and abandoned by rival branches of her own family. Others never left the shadows at all. In the great courts of Austria, France, and Russia, the practice of putting aside heirs who did not meet the family standards was as old as the palaces themselves. You hear the story of an archduchess who vanished from all records after her 3rd birthday. A footman tells you quietly of a gentle prince who spent his entire life in a remote hunting lodge. attended by nuns and remembered only in a few family letters. Their portraits were painted, if at all, only to hang in the most private chambers. The more monstrous the affliction, the more elaborate the cover-up. When a future king was born with severe deformities, the court would sometimes declare him dead and substitute a younger sibling as the new heir. In some cases, mothers and nurses swore oaths of secrecy, while midwives and doctors were rewarded or threatened into silence. But not all mistakes could be hidden. Sometimes the new heir was so important that even obvious deformities were downplayed or normalized by the court. Charles II of Spain, with his famous Habsburg jaw, was made king anyway, his every weakness attributed to witchcraft, the evil eye, or his enemies' curses rather than the choices of his ancestors. His portraits were carefully managed, the angle always flattering, his deformities softened by velvet and lace. You see the court at work, a team of painters, tailors and musicians ready to construct a public image of vitality and majesty. When the true condition of an heir could not be disguised, the next step was to present them as symbols of God's mysterious will, objects of public pity or pious inspiration. You witness a parade in Vienna, where a princess with a withered arm is carried on a velvet pillow through the streets, her fragility in that moment spun into a display of faith and royal suffering. The people weep, toss flowers, and return home to wonder what truly goes on behind the palace gates. For many, life was far less forgiving. Some monstrous heirs became cautionary tales, their existence invoked to scare younger royals into obedience, or to justify the next round of cousin marriages. At least our family has never had a child like that. In some cases, royal monsters were made into living warnings, paraded before the court at family gatherings, as examples of what happens when the rules of blood are broken, or ironically when they're followed too closely. The treatment of these children varied wildly. Some families, unable to face the shame, abandoned them altogether. Others, in an odd twist of compassion, doted on their damaged heirs, showering them with attention and luxuries while ensuring they never appeared in public. Occasionally, you find a story of real affection, a king who taught his mute son to paint, a queen who kept her daughter with her always, refusing to let the child's twisted legs keep her from court. But even the greatest love could not overcome the isolation imposed by the world outside the nursery. In some corners of the palace, a sense of superstition hangs thick in the air. You watch as an old nurse tucks amulets beneath a prince's pillow, or as a bishop blesses a young girl's misshapen feet, hoping to drive out evil spirits, or bring about a miracle cure. Some of these children were thought to be touched by God, and their suffering became an emblem of saintliness, a hard comfort for a child who only wanted to play in the gardens or ride in a carriage with their siblings. You catch a glimpse of a secret garden, walled and hidden from all but the most trusted staff, where imperfect heirs are allowed a measure of freedom. Here, laughter echoes among the roses, and games are played in the safety of shadows. It's a small, fragile happiness, one that can't survive the glare of public scrutiny. But for most, the world remains closed. Their names are erased from the official genealogies, their birthdays uncelebrated, their deaths barely noted. Except in a family Bible, you find a box of old toys, a wooden horse, a cracked doll, tucked away in an attic, reminders of lives cut short or lived in the half-light. And then, unexpectedly, you encounter the court dwarf, the jester, or the natural fool, outsiders, who, unlike royal children, are sometimes celebrated for their difference. The paradox is bitter. A prince born with a limp must be hidden, while a jester with the same is paid to entertain. You sense the sharp edge of hypocrisy. The closer to the throne, the higher the standards, and the greater the loneliness. Even when monstrous heirs reach adulthood, their lives are seldom their own. You see a young man made bishop at 16, shunted into the church not for his piety, but because he is too frail to rule. The princess becomes abbess of a distant convent, her royal status a protection against the outside world's cruelty. Some find peace in these new roles, others languish, the echo of palace life never fading. You stand for a moment in a silent crypt beneath the palace. The names carved on these stones are familiar, but here and there, A blank space interrupts the pattern. These are the sons and daughters who never wore a crown, whose stories survive only in rumour and secret sorrow. You trace the cold marble with your fingers and wonder at the cost paid for the sake of blood and pride. Before you leave, you look once more at the grand tapestries and oil paintings lining the public halls. Now you see what is missing as much as what is displayed. For every king, queen, and perfect heir shown in radiant splendour, there are others, hidden, erased, but never truly forgotten. Their stories are the shadows that linger in every echoing corridor, a quiet reminder that the cost of keeping the family tree pure was measured, most cruelly, in the lives of those who were born different. You find yourself drawn out of the private rooms and hidden gardens, down the palace steps, past the guards who barely glance your way, and into the sprawling world beyond the palace gates. Here, the consequences of royal inbreeding spill out from the candlelit nurseries and echo through the muddy lanes of Europe's cities, villages, and farmlands. For every monstrous heir hidden away, there are thousands of ordinary people living in the shadow of a tottering dynasty. In this section, you sense the cost not only to princes and princesses, but to the crowds who must navigate a world shaped by the ambitions and the fragility of their royal masters. The air outside is colder, sharper, touched with the mingled scents of smoke, animals, and river mud. You mingle with merchants unloading barrels of wine, peasants carrying sacks of flour, beggars with thin faces and hopeful eyes. The city's heartbeat is a steady thrum of work, worry, and small joys. A wedding feast in a common tavern, children's laughter echoing down alleyways, a priest bell calling the faithful to morning prayer. For the people who live here, the palace is both protector and threat, distant but always present, its troubles as real as famine or flood. As you walk the cobbled streets, you overhear talk of royal births, marriages, and deaths. A merchant's wife boasts, "The Queen has delivered a healthy boy. God save the King." Old women at the well debate which saint's relic was responsible, while younger men argue about taxes and conscription, their voices tight with the knowledge that another sickly prince might mean years of instability, higher levies, or even war. Royal blood is a blessing when it brings peace, a curse when it fails. History books often describe dynastic decline as a matter of court intrigue, backroom deals, or the rise and fall of armies. But tonight you see the slow erosion at street level. When a king is weak, his mind clouded or his body frail, governance suffers. Ministers jockey for power, rival factions emerge, and the business of rule-setting fair taxes, enforcing laws, providing food in hard times, falters. Inbreeding's impact on a dynasty can mean years of muddled decisions, contradictory edicts, or the neglect of basic infrastructure. You see this in the broken bridge left unrepaired, the granaries emptied too soon, the riots over bread that flare up in hard winters. Sometimes the effect is more direct. You hear stories of regions plunged into civil war because a royal line ended with a child who could not rule or bear heirs. In Spain, after the death of Charles II, chaos ripples outward. Provinces break away, armies march, crops are trampled underfoot. In France, a king's long illness means vital reforms are delayed, and merchants curse the bad blood that keeps the treasury empty. Even in times of peace, the uncertainty that comes with fragile monarchs seeps into daily life. A persistent anxiety, a sense that the world could tilt at any moment. You meet an old soldier in a tavern, his hands scarred and strong. He remembers the years when the kingdom had no clear leader, when generals made their own laws, and the king's orders were ignored. The palace was a maze, he says with a laugh that isn't really a laugh. But the streets were worse. No one knew who was in charge. We fought for scraps, for pay, for pride, all because the king's mind was half in this world, half in the next. Women suffer in their own way. You listen to a midwife tell of the queen's long labour, the worry in the palace leaking into every home. "If the baby dies, the whole city will wear black," she says, her hands busy with laundry. "If he lives, we pray he's strong." No one wants another season of bad luck. Not after last year. Mothers hush their children when palace news is bad. Don't cry, or the king will hear you and offer extra prayers for royal health, knowing their own fortunes are tied to those of a family they will never meet. The clergy feel it too. You enter a crowded church where the priest offers special blessings for the king's health, the queen's fertility, the safe delivery of heirs. Candles burn night and day, wax pooling around wooden saints. Sometimes you see the priest's hands shake as he offers up his prayers. His family too depends on the stability of the crown. In the countryside, the impact is less visible but no less real. A harvest fails, and the peasants grumble that the king is cursed, that the blood of too many cousins has soured the land. When a nobleman raises taxes to fund another war of succession, farm families hide their sons, fearing conscription or press gangs. Bandits flourish in the chaos left by an absent or incapacitated monarch. Justice is slow, and violence seeps into the forests and roads. You wander into a market square at dusk. The crowd gathered around a troupe of storytellers. Children listen, wide-eyed as a grey-haired woman spins a tale of the princess who slept 100 years, thinly veiled gossip about a real princess locked away for her strangeness. Folklore fills the gaps in official news. Every monster prince becomes a cautionary fable, every vanished princess a ghost story. The lines between fact and legend blur, and you realize that, even in their absence, the royal family shapes the imagination and fears of the people. Sometimes the people rebel. A baker tells you between customers of the bread riots that broke out when rumors spread of the king's madness. They say he talks to paintings now, she whispers, that the council runs the country and the rest of us just pay. Resentment grows like a weed, especially when taxes rise to support royal luxuries while villages starve. You sense that the people's patience is not infinite. Dynasties have fallen before, swept away by the anger of crowds with nothing left to lose. Yet, even in hard times, hope persists. The announcement of a new royal birth draws crowds to the palace gates. Bells ring, bread is distributed, and for a moment the city is united in joy. The fragile bond between ruler and ruled is patched, if only briefly, by the promise of continuity. For every tale of disaster there is another of endurance. Villages that rebuild after war, families that celebrate marriages and births regardless of the throne's troubles. You see too how the palace tries to reassure its people. Grand processions, festivals, and public prayers serve to distract from rumors of weak heirs or mad kings. The monarch appears in public, surrounded by strong sons and beautiful daughters, some real, some borrowed for the day. The illusion of stability is carefully maintained, for everyone knows that confidence is as important as power. But beneath the surface, the anxiety never really disappears. Every failed harvest, every epidemic, every political crisis is blamed on the health of the royal line. You hear a mother scold her children, "Don't cross your eyes, or you'll end up like the king." Superstition flourishes where certainty is in short supply. You wander through the city as night falls, lanterns flickering in the damp air. At the edge of a cemetery you see a group of women lighting candles for lost children, for husbands gone to war, for a better future. Their prayers rise like mist, joining the whispered hopes of millions across the centuries. You sense that in every country, the fates of the powerful and the powerless are joined by blood, by fear, by longing. And you realize that, for all its glitter and grandeur, the story of royal inbreeding is not just about monstrous heirs behind palace doors. It is about the ripples that spread outward, touching every life, every harvest, every lullaby sung in a cottage or slum. The price is paid in empty cradles and silent kitchens, in lost years and ruined hopes, in the laughter that fades too soon from the streets. As you return to the palace, you pause at the great gates, feeling the weight of centuries pressing in. You know now that the line between the rulers and the ruled is thinner than anyone likes to admit, drawn in sand, easily washed away. And you wonder, as you slip back into the hush of the palace, how many lives have been shaped or broken by the quiet tragedies hidden in its deepest rooms. The palace is quiet, as if the walls themselves are listening, waiting, perhaps for someone to finally name the shadow that has crept through these halls for centuries. In the libraries and studies, under the flicker of candlelight, A new kind of curiosity stirs. You find yourself drawn into these quieter corners where the fear and shame that once surrounded Monstrous heirs is beginning, very slowly, to give way to the questions of science. This is the genealogy of warnings, the long, slow dawn of understanding. You step into a study filled with papers, the shelves crowded with thick tomes and slender volumes in Latin, French, and German. In one corner, a portrait of a queen with haunted eyes stares down at you. On a table nearby, a physician's notes are scattered among a pile of yellowed family trees. The old words, melancholy, delicate, unfit, are crossed out and replaced by more careful clinical language. Here, the history of royal inbreeding is being re-examined, not as a matter of fate or divine punishment, but as something that can be traced, measured, and perhaps even understood. For centuries, the truth hid in plain sight. Priests and midwives, doctors and diplomats, all knew that certain royal families had bad blood. They saw the patterns: children who died young, kings who fell into madness, princesses who never spoke or walked. They invented stories, curses, witches, the wrath of God. But the evidence mounted. Again and again, the same faces, the same afflictions, the same families. You see the pattern too, in the shape of the Habsburg jaw, the melancholy of Bourbon queens, the tragic fates of Spanish and Portuguese princes. It took courage and time for anyone to ask the right questions. Early medical pioneers began to keep records, not just of symptoms, but of marriages, births and deaths. You find a physician's diary from the 18th century, written in a crabbed hand. The children of cousin marriages are often sickly. Their eyes do not focus. Their limbs are twisted. I suspect it is the blood itself that is wrong. The words are tentative, but the meaning is clear. Here, in ink and observation, is the first whisper of modern genetics. You find a physician's diary from the 18th century, written in a crabbed hand. The children of cousin marriages are often sickly. Their eyes do not focus. Their limbs are twisted. I suspect it is the blood itself that is wrong. The words are tentative, but the meaning is clear. Here, in ink and observation, is the first whisper of modern genetics. The science grows, painfully slow. For every doctor who dares to question tradition, there are a dozen courtiers, priests, and even fellow doctors who defend the old ways. God chooses the king, they insist, and the king's blood is holy. But evidence is stubborn. Royal families hire the best physicians from across Europe, and some of these outsiders, unburdened by family loyalty, begin to notice the same things. The best families are, in a quiet way, their own worst enemies. You move forward in time through the 19th and early 20th centuries. The world is changing. Steamships cross oceans, newspapers circulate from Paris to Vienna to St. Petersburg, and ideas spread faster than ever before. Scientific journals begin to publish case studies, accounts of royal madness, birth defects, and hereditary illnesses. The Habsburgs are studied not as paragons of power, but as warning signs. Medical students memorize their names as cautionary tales. The truth comes into focus in fits and starts. In England, Queen Victoria becomes known as the Grandmother of Europe. Her children married into every major royal house, but her descendants carry with them a hidden curse: hemophilia, the royal disease, which afflicts the blood, leaving young princes to bleed uncontrollably from the slightest wound. For the first time, the public sees the direct consequences of inherited illness, and the whispers become headlines. The new science of genetics finally gives a name to the old pattern. Gregor Mendel, an Austrian monk, quietly crossbreeds his peas and discovers how traits pass from one generation to the next. Others take up the work, studying plants, then animals, then people. By the early 20th century, words like recessive gene and hereditary defect enter the language of the palace. As well as the laboratory, doctors begin to chart the marriages of kings and queens, tracking how certain conditions, weak hearts, brittle bones, mental illness, follow the lines of descent. You see a flicker of recognition in the faces of the new generation of royals. Some, for the first time, choose to marry outside their immediate families. A Spanish prince weds a Bavarian princess with no close ties to his own line. A Russian Grand Duchess looks for a husband among the healthy nobility of France and Britain. It's not always enough, but it's a start. Still, tradition is slow to die. In the grand salons, you hear heated debates. It's the will of God. No, it's the price of pride. Surely, our blood is stronger than that of the peasants. Old beliefs clash with new discoveries. Some courts embrace the new science, inviting doctors to consult on marriage plans. Others cling stubbornly to the past, fearing scandal more than sickness. But the tide is turning. In a small, sunlit room, you watch a prince and his advisors unfurl a family tree, tracing each branch and marking it with notes. Here, madness. Here, hemophilia. Here, childlessness. They consult a physician, not a priest or an astrologer, for guidance on whom the next heir should marry. It's an imperfect process, riddled with prejudice and uncertainty, but it is an acknowledgement at last that the mistakes of the past need not dictate the future. The new science also brings guilt, a slow-burning shame that settles over the royal families. The stories of hidden children, erased names, and cruel marriages are seen not as necessary sacrifices, but as tragedies. Memoirs, letters, and even novels begin to tell the truth, that monstrous heirs were not monsters but victims, that madness was not a curse but a consequence. Outside the palace, the public grows more skeptical of the old myths. Journalists publish exposes on royal illnesses. Artists and playwrights satirize the closed world of dynastic marriage. Blue blood becomes a punchline, not a point of pride. In time, Republican revolutions sweep across Europe, toppling thrones and rewriting the rules of inheritance. The obsession with bloodline, once a foundation of power, is now a source of ridicule. And yet, you sense that something precious is also being lost. The feeling of continuity, of belonging to a line that stretches back into legend. For all its flaws, the old world offered a sense of place, a story in which every birth and marriage had meaning. Now the future is uncertain, the past a warning. As you walk through the palace one last time, you see the old portraits with new eyes. The chins and jaws, the haunted eyes and delicate limbs, are no longer mysteries or divine signs. They are the evidence of choices made and lessons learned too late. But you also see the beginnings of change, a willingness to listen, to question, to hope that the next generation might be spared the worst. In a quiet alcove, you find a book left open, its margins filled with notes. Let us not forget, someone has written, lest we be doomed to repeat. You realize, as you step into the daylight, that the genealogy of warnings is both a confession and a promise. The past cannot be changed, but its lessons are there for anyone willing to listen. And perhaps, just perhaps, the future can be different, if only the courage to see, to learn and to love proves stronger than the fear of scandal or the pride of tradition. The palace is quieter now, as if it too is exhausted by centuries of secrets, sorrow, and hope. The night outside has grown still and deep. Inside, the candles burn lower, painting the marble and wood in golden pools of memory. You sense, as you move through these last corridors, that the story of inbreeding, monstrous heirs and royal decline, is winding toward its end. Not with a single disaster or glorious revolution, but with a slow, persistent turning of the world. This is the legacy left behind, the echoes of warnings, the marks of sorrow, and the small human victories that shine in unexpected places. You pass through a gallery of kings and queens, painted, sculpted, remembered, and feel the weight of their lives, their choices, and their burdens. Each portrait holds a secret, a jawline passed from father to son, a wary gaze, a hand resting on a child's shoulder as if both protecting and imprisoning. Some faces are familiar: Habsburgs, Bourbons, Tudors, Romanovs, each one both a ruler and in their own way a prisoner of blood. Yet, as you pause before these paintings, you notice something else. The faces have begun to change. In the final portraits, the lines are softer, the eyes brighter, the costumes less ornate. It's as if the portraits themselves have loosened, allowing room for laughter, for imperfection, for hope. The world outside has changed, and so have the heirs inside the palace. Marriages are no longer only contracts. Sometimes, astonishingly, they are also for love. Cousins still marry, but less often, outsiders are invited in, welcomed where once they were feared. You see, in the footnotes of history, the new stories, a princess who chooses her own husband, a prince who weds for affection, not alliance. You watch as a royal child with a limp or a stutter is not hidden away, but celebrated for his courage, his wit, his determination to be something more than a symbol. Slowly, the monsters become people again, and the palace itself breathes easier. You move on, through chambers, now filled with the dust of memory. Here are the letters, pages upon pages of longing, regret, and resolve. Here is the nursery, with its worn toys and faded blankets, each one a relic of dreams, both fulfilled and broken. Here in a small chapel, the queen kneels alone, her whispered prayer not for power or purity, but for kindness, for understanding, for forgiveness. As dawn approaches, you find yourself on a balcony overlooking the sleeping city. The towers of the palace rise against the first pale light, and you hear the distant bells marking the hour. You realize with a quiet certainty that the story of royal inbreeding is, at its core, a story about fear and love, about what people will risk and what they will lose in the name of both. For centuries, fear ruled these halls. Fear of losing power, of inviting chaos, of letting outsiders in. Fear led to closed doors, secret rooms, broken children, and broken hearts. It led to the careful calculations of doctors, priests, and queens. To desperate prayers, fear, it led to the hiding of those who could not fit, the rewriting of genealogies, the painting over of flaws. And yet, despite all that fear, love kept breaking through. In a mother's embrace, a father's joke, a child's laughter echoing in the garden. Love in the end is what begins to save the story. You notice that as science uncovers the real risks of cousin marriage, families begin to listen slowly, reluctantly, but surely. The next generation grows up hearing not only the tales of grand triumphs, but also the quieter stories of lost siblings, hidden cousins, and doctors who dared to tell the truth. The family tree grows, new branches, new blood enters the line, and the world becomes just a little larger, a little kinder. You linger for a moment in the great hall, where generations of kings once dined beneath chandeliers that glittered like 1,000 stars. The table is empty now, but you imagine it filled again. Not only with princes and princesses, but with friends, with strangers welcomed for their humor or wisdom, with laughter that is genuine and tears that are not a source of shame. This is the legacy worth fighting for. A world where no child is hidden for their difference, where every heir is more than a face on a coin or a name in a book. As you walk the final corridor, your steps slow. You have traced the arc of centuries, the choices made, the warnings ignored, the lessons learned. You have seen the cost, counted not only in thrones lost or battles fought, but in quiet moments. A nurse soothing a frightened child, a king pacing sleepless at dawn, a servant lighting a candle for a forgotten soul. And now, as the light grows, you see that the story is not only a warning, but a call, a gentle, insistent hope that the future might be gentler, wiser, more forgiving. You pause at the threshold of the palace, the last echo of your footsteps fading behind you. The world is waking. In the distance, a clock chimes. You take a breath, feeling the air stir with possibility. The story is not done. Not here, not anywhere. The lessons of monstrous heirs and tangled bloodlines live on, urging us to remember, to question, to care. In the end, we are all heirs to history, all responsible for the future we make. The sky is softening outside, pale blue folding gently into gold. Your eyes grow heavy as the palace, at last, surrenders to dawn. You feel the weight of stories behind you, some sorrowful, some triumphant, all quietly, profoundly human. Let your breath deepen as the world beyond your window grows still. Imagine the echoing halls at rest, the tapestries gathering dust, the portraits at peace in the gentle dawn. Tonight you've wandered through centuries of choices, some wise, many foolish, all shaped by love, fear, and the longing to belong. You've seen the cost of keeping blood too close, the pain of hiding difference, the quiet hope that grows whenever someone dares to open a door or tell the truth. You have listened to the whispers of lost heirs, the prayers of queens, the laughter and loneliness of children waiting for morning. Now, as you drift towards sleep, know that you are not alone with these memories. The world is wide, its story ever unfolding. There is always room in some warm and distant hall for new beginnings, for kindness, for courage, for change. Whatever your inheritance, joy or sorrow, hope or worry, let it settle, soft as dust, and be at peace with it. You are part of a history that stretches beyond palaces and crowns, a history that lives wherever people dream of better days. So, breathe slowly, let your thoughts grow lighter, and allow yourself to rest in the gentle knowledge that even the oldest stories can find new endings. You've wandered far tonight. Let the quiet take you now. Sweet dreams, my dear timeless community.